Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Always Woke Up Holding a Red Crayon? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Shoyuta was going to murder whoever thought it would be a good idea to start banging on his door at 6:03 in the morning, only seconds after he had finally managed to fall asleep after coming home from a grueling patrol. He didn't even care who it was. Shoyuta would not hesitate, not even if it was a repentant Hisashi who had forgotten his key. He would simply need to cash in on the pact that he and Nemuri made at UA, that when one of them inevitably snaps and murders someone, the other will help them hide the body. R.I.P. to Hisashi. If he didn't want to get murdered, then he shouldn't be knocking until 6 hours later, at the earliest. Bang bang bang. They're still banging on the door. Shoyuta puts on the most terrifying glare he can muster, the one that makes criminals in dark alleys tremble with fear while grabbing his capture scarf, a little grateful that he had been too tired to change out of his costume when he got home, so he wasn't answering the door in his licensed present mic pajamas that Hisashi had gifted him. In a swift, practiced motion, the capture scarf was around his neck and he was unlocking the door, slamming it open hard enough that it rebounded off the wall. There was no one there. He looked around, but there wasn't a single person in sight. Shoyuta was just about to slam the door shut with a curse when someone cleared their throat. Eraserhead. Just the person I need to see. Shoyuta looked down and felt his soul leave his body. There was a child standing on his doorstep. No more than 4 years old, with a mop of green curls and wide emerald eyes staring up at him. Shoyuta wasn't a violent person by nature, but by necessity. Right now, nothing was more important to him than climbing back into bed and falling into a coma, and if he has to punt a small child off of his property to do it, well. But a little voice in his head that sounded suspiciously like Hisashi told him that, while he would be able to sleep as much as he would want in prison, being stuck in a building with a bunch of criminals you helped put away was not a great idea, and should be avoided at all costs. Shoyuta sighed. What do you want? Make it quick. Funny, I was going to say the same thing, the kid quipped, and Shoyuta finally took a proper look at the kid. He was wearing an All Might onesie. Bright, garish, with 2 yellow things that look like the #1 hero's iconic hair tufts hanging limply off of the hood. The eye-searing colors aren't what make him pause, though it's pretty FNG close. The thing that makes him pause is just how dead inside the kid looks. And coming from Shoyuta, that's saying a lot. Eraserhead, I want you to kill me. Shoyuta did a double take. What the F dash? Midoriya Izuku has an immortality quirk, though not in the traditional sense. While most other immortality quirks work by not allowing the owner to age, maybe even giving them extra resilience, Izuku's quirk didn't quite work like that. No, Izuku's quirk had no outward signs, no mutations or secondary abilities. He even had the toe joint, which had allowed the quirk to go undetected right up until he activated it. The only thing this quirk did was send his consciousness back into his 4-year-old body upon death. Again and again, no matter when, where, or how he died, he always woke up afterwards, his small fist clenched around a bright red crayon that he, until the moment of his resurrection, had been using to draw a picture of All Might on a piece of construction paper. With the help of far too much practice, Izuku was able to get back to drawing in a matter of seconds, in spite of having just choked to death on his own blood only moments before. Indeed, he was doing a much better job than the first few times around, none more catastrophic than the first time he looped, waking up after being turned into a pile of dust by Shigaraki Tamura. Izuku had ended up traumatizing just about everyone in the room in that loop. Izuku didn't like to think about that too much. Hey Deku, look at my drawing. Kaken calls out. Izuku looks up, taking a long look at the drawing. It's a drawing he's seen maybe 100 times, Izuku's not sure since he lost count some time ago. It's us in our hero costumes. Kaken exclaimed proudly as he waved the paper around. 2 colored blobs had been drawn on the center of the page, one was orange, red, and black while the other one was just green. Izuku mustered up a smile and a bright, "That's great, Kaken," even though Izuku was exhausted. Izuku always seemed exhausted for the next few days after coming back, though the last few times it had just seemed to get worse and worse. Thank God nap time was announced only 5 minutes later, like he had known it would be. Izuku eagerly wrapped himself in his blanket. Within seconds of lying down, he was fast asleep. With nap time over and a clearer head, Izuku was able to think about things. Like, how much energy he was going to have to expend to pretend to be the happy child he was when he left the house this morning in this timeline in order to keep up appearances. And the crushing weight of despair at living once again, trapped in an endless, repeating loop. And how he was finally going to get that limited edition Eraserhead shampoo when it came out in a few months, even if it killed him. Hold up. Eraserhead. Quirk, erasure, temporarily blocks emitter and transformation quirks. Izuku's quirk has to be some kind of emitter, right? So theoretically, if Eraserhead had his quirk activated and used it on Izuku as he died, it might stop him from coming back again, right? Of course, that is simply one possibility, the other being that Eraserhead would have to erase Izuku's quirk the second it manifested, which simply wasn't possible without his prior consent and the help of someone with a time travel quirk. But that's not important right now. Dying. Of course, he had considered this before, maybe around the third loop, but then dismissed it because back then he still wanted to live. Not this Izuku. Izuku was ready for the sweet embrace of death. By his last calculation, he had lived over 132 cumulative years, and that was a few loops ago. Izuku had become All Might's protege and the #1 hero 3 times over before he got bored and decided to switch it up for the next loop by becoming a support technician. Then from there, he had bounced around. First quirkless hero, an above-ground one first before giving the whole underground hero thing a go. Doctor. Neurosurgeon. Therapist. Novelist. He hadn't actually written the novel from scratch, instead ripping off a popular book that would have been released 20 years after Izuku released the first book. From there he had simply lived off the royalty checks for the rest of his life. It was quite a popular novel, picked up a few hobbies before being killed in a house invasion by some 2-bit thugs. Izuku could have of course defended himself, but by that time he was getting bored and decided to just let it happen. This was when the boredom started really kicking in. Izuku became a really skilled pickpocket, before escalating until he ended up committing one of the largest heists of the modern era. Izuku had been incredibly proud of the to-scale resin replica of All Might that had been part of an exhibition on the hero at a museum in Tokyo. Then he decided to start causing mischief around Muzutafu, mostly spray painting ominous coded messages around the city. The most memorable one had been his last of that run, which was the message, "Have you visited your mother in the hospital recently?" written in bright blue paint, followed by an incredibly detailed, Izuku had gotten a lot of practice at this point and his art was quite good, thank you, picture of a grumpy-looking Dabi. It was the most memorable because when Dabi had found Izuku a week later, spray painting yet another message. This one was going to be directed at All Might because while Izuku still respected the man, he also felt it was his duty to keep the man on his toes, with simple messages like, "All Might's hair actually tastes disgusting," and "Yagi Tashinori" for the title of #1 father. Dabi had simply incinerated him on the spot. Well actually, Izuku had called him Tuya to his face first, so maybe he deserved it. Izuku sure as hell learned his lesson and never made the same mistake again. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. So Izuku did some crazy stuff. Like becoming a full-time drag queen. And faking a brain injury for a whole loop, God that was so much fun, pretending to get knocked out by Kaken and waking up fluently speaking a language he shouldn't know and having to relearn Japanese had been hilarious. Maybe he became the world's most feared supervillain because why the hell not? Izuku died that time when Kaken had gotten a little rough when bringing him in, Izuku coping the full force of Kaken's gauntlets point blank to the face. At the very least, that death had been pretty quick and fairly painless compared to some others he'd suffered. In need of some serious Rand R, he spent his next few runs just chilling. His last one, he'd spent as a child intellectual prodigy, making friends with Nedzu and running a quaint little flower shop just south of Muzutafu's CBD, until some a-hole rookie pro hero making their debut had decided, yeah sure, let's throw a dude with knives hard as diamonds for hands through a building and hope for the best. Izuku, who had been in the back of his shop taking stock and generally ignoring the racket going on outside, had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The villain sliced his throat open, and that's how Izuku died from choking on his own blood. Of course, those aren't all of the occupations he's had, but they're the most memorable. Point is, Izuku may have completely forgotten the man until just now, but that won't happen again. As soon as kindergarten was let out, Izuku would go home and bide his time until he could slip away from his mother, track the man down and convince him to kill Izuku. What could go wrong? Deku, stop mumbling. Izuku startled and looked up to see Kaken glaring at him. Izuku smiled sheepishly. Sorry, Kaken. Finding the home address of one Aizawa Shoyuda was simple. It was more challenging to give his overprotective mother the slip in order to go to the address. Izuku planned this perfectly. He remembered from his internship that one time with the hero that he patrolled from the late evenings to early mornings and such. The best time to strike would be in the morning, when he is alone before he's had the chance to get much sleep, if any. The sleep deprivation would hopefully both impair his judgment and make him angry when he answered the door to a small snot-nosed brat. Perfect for his plan. Except when Izuku made his request, Eraserhead immediately became more alert and the traces of anger on his face disappeared. Izuku frowned. Of course, he had forgotten the first rule of battle strategy. No plan survives contact with the enemy. What the F dash? Eraserhead probably didn't even realize he had spoken. Izuku tapped his foot. He had gotten straight to the point. What was Eraserhead having trouble comprehending? You're probably the only person alive who could truly kill me, Izuku elaborated, because of your quirk. Eraserhead closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Okay, let's take this from the top. He opened his eyes again and Izuku was concerned over how bloodshot they were. You want me? He pointed to himself. To kill you? He paused for confirmation and Izuku nodded. Why? Izuku pursed his lips in order to stop himself from embarrassing himself. He so wanted to say, even in a room full of people I feel so alone, no one understands me or the burden this godforsaken quirk has placed on my shoulders. Do you know what it's like to see an old friend on the street, one who you had died for, would die for again? And again just for them to not recognize you? To not remember a single moment shared between you and them? Do you know what it's like to look into your partner's eyes, the person who you vowed to love until death do you part, die, and then see them again only for them to watch you coldly without emotion, or glare daggers at you every time you pass them? Instead, all he said was, I've lived too long and I'm ready to die. Eraserhead looked up and down the street before grabbing Izuku by the scruff of his all-might onesie. The only good part about being a literal toddler again was the clothes. They were all so soft, and picking him up, bringing him inside and shutting the door behind him. Eraserhead only released Izuku to get him to sit on the couch in the living room of the apartment before sitting himself down on the coffee table in front of Izuku. They sat in silence for a while, both of them watching the other. Izuku took a moment to look his former teacher over. By Izuku's calculation he must be 21 right now, and he definitely looked it. His eye bags were still as large and dark as Izuku remembered, though his face had a certain sharpness to it that he would lose in the next few years. He also seemed a little underweight. Izuku scowled. Have you been eating? Eraserhead's mouth opened and closed. What? Izuku crossed his arms. You look skinny, you need to eat something more filling than jelly pouches, you know? Eraserhead crossed his arms. I don't see how that's any of your business. Izuku crossed his own arms. As a hero, it's your responsibility to take care of yourself properly so you don't burn out. Do you want to burn out, Sensei? Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. Sensei? He questioned before he shook his head. Why do you want to die? Izuku also narrowed his eyes. I already told you. I've lived too long. You're a toddler, Eraserhead said slowly. Yeah, and? Why was he making such a big deal about this? Eraserhead pinched the bridge of his nose. You're a toddler, you shouldn't want to die. He looked up at Izuku with furrowed brows. Is someone hurting you? Are you safe at home? What? No. Izuku threw his hands up, shaking his head. Mom would never hurt me. Is this a cry for help? For attention? Eraserhead seemed so lost. Izuku face-palmed. No, this is the real deal. Just let me start from the beginning. See the way my quirk works. When Izuku had finished explaining his quirk, Eraserhead leaned back, rubbing at his eyes. Finally he lowered his hands and looked at Izuku, meeting his eyes. I won't kill you. What? Izuku uncrossed his arms as he leaned forward to glare at his former teacher. Why the hell not? Eraserhead met Izuku's angry gaze, blinking sleepily. Do you want the list in alphabetical order or in order of magnitude? Izuku just scowled at him. Eraserhead blinked slowly, like a sleepy cat. First off, you are a 4-year-old child right now. Do you know who kills 4-year-old children? He didn't wait for an answer before plowing on. Villains. Villains kill 4-year-old children. I am a pro-hero, not a villain, he explained slowly, like he was explaining a difficult concept to a child. Izuku winced at the poor choice in metaphor. Furthermore, how do I know you aren't just a really smart and really depressed 4-year-old? That's much more likely than time travel. Besides the fact that if I really were just simply suicidal, I'd just find a bridge or a roof or something to jump off of? Izuku rolled his eyes. Your civilian name is Aizawa Shoyuta, your birthday is on November 8th and your favorite animal is cats. Eraserhead frowned. All stuff that could be found easily enough if you know where to look. Izuku sighed. You're married to your high school sweetheart, Yamada Hizashi, also known as Present Mike. Eraserhead frowned. What? We're not married? Izuku grimaced. Whoops. Guess that hasn't happened yet this time. But it will. Eraserhead was blushing. That's not very convincing. What? But you two are so obviously in love. Eraserhead's blush deepened. The time travel thing. Not, ugh. He stared off into the middle distance, looking completely dead inside. Izuku thought for a second. Okay, let me do the math real quick. God, even after all these years, Izuku still hated doing math, even if he was good at it. Okay, so in like 4 years or so, All Might's gonna get in this fight with this villain called All for One, he can give and take quirks, and the two almost kill each other. All Might thinks he succeeded for like 6 years until my first year of UA, when All for One makes his comeback. Eraserhead squinted at Izuku. Someone who can take and give quirks? That shouldn't be possible. Izuku rolled his eyes. Yeah, and multi-quirked brain-dead killing machines shouldn't be either, but, well... Izuku trailed off, remembering that the Nomu didn't exist yet. Ugh, keeping the events in the different timelines separate in his own head was becoming so hard. Look, if you don't believe me, why don't we pay Detective Tsukachi a visit? Eraserhead frowned. The rookie? Izuku nodded. Do you remember what his quirk is? Eraserhead thought for a second before his eyes lit up in understanding. Lie detector. Izuku nodded. He can verify that everything I'm saying is the truth. Eraserhead pursed his lips. His quirk won't register what you're saying as false if you're delusional. Eraserhead leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees and fingers laced together. Even if your story is true, and you're actually an old man in a child's body, my answer is still the same. I will not kill you. Izuku went to protest, but Eraserhead held up his hand. I wasn't done. I won't kill you as you are now, he sighed then, looking so tired, but if you still want to die when you turn 18, then I'll use my quirk on you. There were 2 things wrong with this. The first he immediately voiced. But I turned 18 on my first run, and I've been through heaps of runs by now. Eraserhead glared at Izuku. Yes, but right now you're 4 years old and I will not be held accountable for a child's death. Izuku groaned. He should have known that Eraserhead's soft spot for children would just make this all the more harder for Izuku. It's not like Izuku himself could begrudge him for that. After all, it would be infinitely easier to end it all by simply using one of the quirk erasing bullets manufactured by the Shai Hasaikai on himself so he wouldn't come back, but Izuku couldn't stomach the thought of letting Overhaul torture Eri for his experiments. In fact, the few constants in Izuku's many loops were saving both Kuda. On his functionally quirkless runs, a simple bullet to Muscular's head had done the trick, and Eri, Izuku had used a couple of different methods for this. Killing Overhaul, gassing the compound and slipping in before leaving with Eri, showing up conveniently at Aries' house the same day as her quirk manifests and dosing her with a mild quirk suppressant in order to stop her from accidentally rewinding her father out of existence. Really, he had it down to a science these days. That left Izuku with his second problem. See, Izuku's quirk gave him the unique opportunity to really study the butterfly effect and the ripples caused by different actions he takes. One of the most prominent examples of this ripple effect are deaths. In particular, the deaths of Azui Tsuyu, Mineta Minoru and Aizawa Shoyuda at the attack on the USJ on the loops when Izuku wasn't there and didn't interfere. The USJ attack, which happens when Izuku is 15. Eraserhead can't kill Izuku if he's dead. Izuku sighs, closes his eyes and takes a deep breath before examining his options. 1. Tip the school off before the attack so they're prepared. From Izuku's past experience, he knows that doing this causes chaos and ends with Izuku in an interrogation room being grilled for hours on how he knew about the attack beforehand, since his stupid toe joints declare him medically quirkless. 2. Preemptively destroy the USJ. Can't get attacked at the USJ if the USJ isn't standing. Except leveling a building like the USJ would take some serious firepower that would be a pain to get a hold of as a weedy-looking young teenager. 3. Once again become a hero, take the UA entrance exam and get into Eraserhead's class so he can be in a position to protect him. 4. Assassinate the entire league of villains, leaving no survivors. Izuku opened his eyes, knowing which option he would have to take. Do we have a deal? Izuku nodded. Yeah, he yawned. This body wasn't used to getting up at dawn yet, but it would only be a matter of time and training. Guess I'll see you at the entrance exams. Eraserhead tilted his head to the side in confusion. What entrance exams? Izuku shook his head. Don't worry about it. I better go before my mum finds out I'm gone. Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. Oh no you don't, you're not going to leave just like that. I need your name and a way to keep in contact with you to make sure you're not going to do something stupidly reckless. Izuku slouched into the couch. There's no point of being reckless and possibly dying though. I'd just go back to a few days ago and I'd have to have this conversation with you all over again. Once was enough. Eraserhead looked like he could see where Izuku was coming from. I'll still be needing a name. Izuku groaned. Don't think I don't know that you're just going to use it to stalk me. He let his head loll to the side. My name's Midoriya Izuku. Eraserhead immediately reached for his phone but Izuku raised his hand. Nope, you're not going to tell anyone this. Eraserhead gave Izuku a smile. Condescending bstd. Izuku tapped into his villain persona as he smiled, all teeth. It would be a rather frustrating and time-consuming problem for me if I had to live the rest of my life in a mental hospital constantly on suicide watch, Izuku conceded. But the staff wouldn't be able to stop me forever. One day I'd die, and then I'd just wake up as a 4-year-old again. Eraserhead was beginning to look unsettled. And I'll still have the same problem. I'll still need your help to die. Except this time, I'll know that coming to you and asking politely won't work, and I'll have to resort to other means. Eraserhead glared. Are you threatening me? Izuku shrugged. Not you specifically, obviously, since I need your quirk. Izuku pretended to think for a bit. Present Mike on the other hand. Eraserhead's quirk activated out of rage and Izuku smiled. Izuku was actually rather fond of Present Mike, so he probably wouldn't need to actually hurt him, maybe abduct him for a bit and keep him in a nice bunker for a couple of days. But Eraserhead didn't know that. You would murder a pro hero, just so you can finally die? Eraserhead asked, looking strained. Izuku's face went blank. It won't be the first time I've killed. I'm so tired, Eraserhead, I just want to finally rest. Eraserhead could obviously hear the sincerity in his voice. If the look on his face was anything to go off of, the mix between pain, anger, and pity. Have you considered therapy? Izuku scoffed. That time I ended up in the psych ward? No one believed I had this quirk since the whole toe joint meaning quirkless theory won't get disproven for another 2 decades. So they threw me on there and threw away the key. I ended up making friends with Todoroki Rei. I introduced her to Mario Kart, that was a blast, and we bonded over shared trauma. Did you know I actually grew up thinking I was totally quirkless the first time round? That was fun. Izuku tilted his head to the side. I always find it hilarious that if I had taken my best friend's advice to take a swan dive off of a roof and hope for a quirk in the next life, I would have prematurely discovered my quirk. Eraserhead's eyes widened. You were told to what? Izuku waved him off. No biggie. In every other loop I've done I've made Demon sure to bring him down a few notches. Helped him with both his superiority complex and his inferiority complex. I actually ended up writing a 53-page dissertation on him for my psychology class once. I got top marks on it. Eraserhead groaned. That's nice, but I need to make sure you get home safe so I can come back home and sleep for a week. Izuku nodded. As nice as it was actually talking about the feats he had completed in his other loops with someone who wouldn't throw him in the psych ward. Not that hanging out with Todoroki Rei wasn't nice, after she got over the fear of hurting him, that is, but being drugged and manhandled by the orderlies is something Izuku would rather not do again. Sheet! Izuku softly exclaimed. This is, hopefully, my last run, which means I have a lot of stuff I need to do right since I won't have any do-overs. That's nice. What's your address? Eraserhead asked tiredly. I'm going to have to take down the number 2 hero, the Hero Commission, the LAV and the MLA all in one run. I'm going to be so busy. What? Izuku put his head in his hands. I'm gonna be so busy. I probably won't have any free time until I'm like 10. That means I won't be able to get a few pieces of hero merch I really want cause I won't have enough time to camp outside of the stores. Oh no. Izuku looked up at Eraserhead in horror. I won't be able to get that limited edition Eraserhead shampoo that comes out in a few months. What? Eraserhead opened his mouth before closing it a few times. He closed his eyes once more, putting his face in his hands. I'm too tired for this. Izuku couldn't help but agree. There was the sound of keys in a lock and the front door to the apartment swung open. A young man with blonde hair crept into the apartment before stopping short at the sight of Izuku and Eraserhead, both looking devastated. Basho? What's going on? Hi, Present Mike. Izuku called, waving at the man. Mike was looking between the two with mounting concern. Izuku took a second to take note of his appearance. His face was mostly the same, though his hair was shorter and he was missing his mustache. Eraserhead looked up at Present Mike, looking simply exhausted. Let's just get this kid home, yeah? Present Mike rushed over, hands hovering over Eraserhead as he fretted over his appearance. You okay, babe? Eraserhead hid his face in his capture weapon, though that did nothing to hide his blush at the pet name. He sent a glare at a smug-looking Izuku, who simply pointed at his ring finger. Can you please take this kid home? I don't think it's safe for him to be walking by himself. Now it was Izuku's turn to glare before reaching into his onesie and producing a butterfly knife that had been his father's. Eraserhead's eyes widened subtly before he closed his eyes once more. Izuku quickly hid the knife away before Present Mike could see it. He seemed like the type to confiscate knives from children out of a sense of concern for their well-being. Yeah, I can take the little listener home. He easily slipped on his hero persona before turning to Izuku. What's your name, little buddy? I'm Midoriya Izuku. Present Mike wasn't the only one who could act. Izuku internally sighed as he slapped on his cheerful toddler persona. It was so tiring to keep up, it had been such a relief to drop it around Eraserhead. Okay buddy, what's your address? Izuku rattled it off and Present Mike nodded. That's not too far from here. I'll escort you home so Grumpy Pants here can get some sleep, okay? Izuku nodded before getting up. Just to once again get picked up. Izuku, however, had been half expecting it this time. The man loved kids, most evident in how he interacted with Eri. Now little listener, say goodbye to Sho Yuta. Izuku nodded, gathering as much cheer as possible before loudly calling out, Bye Eraserhead, sir. Eraserhead winced before half-heartedly waving. Izuku saw Present Mike grin as he looked between Izuku and Eraserhead and shuddered. He hoped nothing bad would come out of this. The two left the apartment, Present Mike carrying Izuku to the train station. Izuku didn't bother protesting, he was tired from walking so far in his tiny 4-year-old body. Present Mike kept up a polite chatter, Mostly surface-level questions and anecdotes for most of the walk, though stopped after a few possibly exaggerated yawns. Shut up, he was a growing boy who needed his rest. They hopped on the train and took it to Izuku's neighborhood. Izuku didn't realize that the train's rhythmic movement had rocked him to sleep until Present Mike was gently shaking his awake. Izuku yawned widely before looking around. They were at the station near Izuku's home. "We're nearly home, little listener," Present Mike announced once Izuku was lucid. Izuku nodded, still a little sleepy. "I don't come here very often, so could you point me in the right direction?" Izuku nodded once again, pointing left. Present Mike began to walk in that direction. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke up again. "So, little listener, what were you doing up so early in the morning on a Saturday so far away from home?" "I needed to talk to Eraserhead about something." Izuku could picture the frown on his young teacher's face. "Are you okay, kiddo? Do you need help?" Izuku nodded. "Yeah, Eraserhead's gonna help me." Izuku could hear the smile in Present Mike's voice as he said, "Oh? Is that so? What do you need help with, little listener? Maybe I can help." Izuku shook his head. "Only Eraserhead can help me." The rest of the walk was in an awkward silence. Izuku ignored it. They ended up in front of Izuku's apartment building in no time. Izuku tried to get Present Mike to just drop him off out front, but he insisted on walking Izuku to the door. Izuku went to unlock the front door with the spare key that he had borrowed, only for the door to be opened before he could fit the key in the lock by Izuku's mother. She stood in the doorway, hair unbrushed in her night dress and sleeping gown. "Me gently with a chainsaw," Izuku muttered quietly under his breath in English, since he could neither get himself out of the habit of swearing nor be caught swearing by his mother. Thank goodness he was still young enough that his occasional English swears were just brushed off as babble. However, Izuku forgot to account for a pro-hero standing right next to him, both fluent in English and still wearing his hero-grade hearing aids, who was able to hear him perfectly. Present Mike choked on his own spit, coughing into his elbow. "Are you okay, sir?" Izuku's mum asked as she used her quirk to pull Izuku into her arms. Izuku squirmed. The two things that irked him about being a kid again were A, no one taking him seriously, and B, being considered a small object by his mum's quirk. Present Mike stopped coughing long enough to nod, his face bright red as he struggled for air. He finally caught his breath and gave Izuku the side eye as he addressed Izuku's mum. "Sorry about that. I just came to make sure the little guy got home safe." Izuku's smile smiled wide. "Thank you so much. I was so worried when I woke up and he wasn't there." She then turned a stern look on Izuku, who ducked his head guiltily. Yes, he may be freaking ancient, but he still respects his mum. "Well," Present Mike started, looking a little ill. "I'll just go then. Goodbye." He turned on his heel and quickly made his way to the entrance. Oops. Izuku may have just accidentally broken a pro-hero. Izuku firmly pushed the thought out of his mind as his mum carried him inside. Izuku may have ended up being lectured to within an inch of his life that morning, but at the very least the nap he had afterwards was one of the best naps he's had, and that's counting the one time he had to get his arm amputated and the doctors had kept him high as a kite for the next couple of days. Oh, how much better he sleeps knowing his days on this earth are numbered. When he woke up later that morning, he grabbed a fresh notebook and a pencil and got to work, laying out a 12-year plan to leave the world a better place when he was gone. As much as Shoyuta wanted to climb back into bed as soon as Hizashi left with the kid, he simply couldn't. The mantra of, "What the F just happened?" kept playing in his head on a loop. So he just lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling until Hizashi came home. Hizashi poked his head in their bedroom and Shoyuta turned his head to let him know that he was awake. Hizashi immediately climbed onto the bed, pulling Shoyuta so his back was pressed to his chest. When Hizashi got settled, the two lay still for a few seconds before Hizashi whispered in his ear, "Shoyuta, babe? Where the F did you find that kid?" Shoyuta groaned. "I didn't find him, he found me." Hizashi pressed his face to the back of Shuta's head. He swore fluently in English, "Babe." Shoyuta closes his eyes. "I'm not dealing with this right now. This is going to be a problem for future Shoyuta. Right now I'm just going to sleep." Hizashi ran his fingers through Shuta's hair. "Sleep, babe." We can discuss adoption when you wake up. Shoyuta groaned louder. It was 2 days after their conversation and Izuku had only managed to ignore Eraserhead for 3 whole blocks as he walked home from kindergarten before giving in with a sigh. The man had been staking out his kindergarten for the past 2 hours and had started following Izuku along the rooftops when he began walking home. He quietly slipped away from Kaken and his lackeys before making a detour into a park. The park had a playground, complete with a slide, a swing set, and a sand pit. Away from the main play area were a few benches that parents often sat on while they watched their children play, gossiping with the other parents present. Izuku climbed onto one of the benches with some difficulty, cursing his short stature all the while, before making himself comfortable. And just in time too, since Eraserhead stepped into the park at that very moment, briefly looking around before his eyes landed on Izuku and he began to make his way over. Izuku simply patted the bench next to him and waited for Eraserhead to sit down. After all, he had all the time in the world. Eraserhead watched him warily as he sat next to Izuku. They sat there for a moment, simply watching each other before Eraserhead finally spoke up. I had to double-check with Hisashi to make sure you weren't just a sleep deprivation-induced hallucination. Even now, I'm still not quite convinced that the conversation we had even happened. The conversation where I asked you to kill me, and like a good dad, told me to wait until I'm 18? Yeah, that happened, Izuku shrugged, ignoring the man as he inhaled sharply and began to choke on his own spit. Izuku couldn't help but think about how unprofessional he was acting. He supposed that it should be expected. It hadn't been that long since Eraserhead had debuted, and he had yet to accumulate the decade of experience that made him such a formidable teacher and hero Izuku remembered from his first life. Eraserhead finally caught his breath. What the F-kid? Izuku rolled his eyes. I'm not a kid, remember? Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. You may have the mind of an old man, but you're still a kid. Okay, but I'm technically older than you, so if you don't stop calling me kid, then I'll start calling you Z. Eraserhead's brows pinched. Who even says ZT? Me. Izuku stuck his tongue out at Eraserhead. A few more kids arrived at the park, their parents trailing along behind them and making their way over to the benches on the other side of the playground. Eraserhead sighed and scrubbed his face with his hands. Whatever. He sighed. I don't get it. I mean, surely you have other options? Technically yes, Izuku said. Slowly, in my first run someone figured out how to destroy quirks permanently. Eraserhead narrowed his eyes. So why don't you just do that instead of showing up on my doorstep? Izuku turned to look Eraserhead dead in the eyes. The people behind it were a Yakuza faction led by a man whose quirk allowed him to disassemble and reassemble anything down to a molecular level, including people. He used this quirk on a young girl in order to keep her alive as he bled her out over and over again in order to get his hands on her powerful quirk. By the time we rescued her, she couldn't remember how to smile. Do you think her life is worth less than mine? Eraserhead had gone pale as a sheet. Jesus Christ, he whispered. He shook his head. It's unnerving how you can go from acting like a happy little kid to acting like a jaded retired pro-hero. Izuku grinned. But I am a jaded retired pro-hero. Eraserhead looked interested. Really? Izuku started vibrating with excitement. He had a combined whole century of service as a pro-hero and he rarely got to brag about it to anyone, and it was slowly driving him insane. You're talking to a 3-time #1 ranked hero and the first quirkless pro-hero, both above ground and underground. Eraserhead frowned. I find it hard to believe you got so high in the rankings with such a non-combative quirk. Oh, but I did have a combative quirk. Izuku was giggling now. Though where I got it is a secret that could threaten national security. Eraserhead groaned. Do you enjoy being cryptically vague? Izuku smirked. I need to get my kicks somehow. I'll tell you what, Izuku stroked his non-existent beard. Even at the ripe old age of 50 he couldn't grow one, damn that stupid gene on his father's side. It turned out that beards and fire-breathing quirks don't mix, and thus no one on his father's side of the family could grow one. I'll tell you all about it when you're older. Hell, I might even show you if I decide to go that route this time, though I doubt it. It was fun being a quirkless hero. Eraserhead sighed. Why did I even come here? Izuku shrugged. Because my face is too cute for you to resist? Admit it, you want to squish these cheeks. Eraserhead rolled his eyes. I was too sleep-deprived last time to realize just how insufferable you are. Are you like this all the time? Izuku shook his head. Nah, most of the time I have to pretend to be a 4-year-old. If I show off my amazing wit and sense of humor, I'd probably be thrown into therapy. Again. You say that like you don't need it, Eraserhead grumbled. Trust me, I got enough of that in the psych ward. Speaking of, Eraserhead made a little huffing sound when Izuku decided to go on yet another tangent. Rei-chan shouldn't have had her mental breakdown yet. If you can extract her and her children from under Endeavor's thumb, it will make their recovery process so much easier. And it means that if I accidentally end up torching that god awful estate, then no innocents will get caught up in the fire. I thought you were joking about taking down Endeavor, Eraserhead said, looking down at Izuku. Izuku shrugged. What can I say? Not only am I ambitious, but I also hate abusive assholes like Endeavor. Did you know that in quite a few timelines, his oldest son becomes an S-ranked villain? He ended up killing Endeavor in those loops before going insane and decided to join Shigaraki in his quest to leave the world as nothing but dust and ash blowing in the wind. Eraserhead was looking stunned. Okay, I'm usually pretty good at this sort of thing, but that's just a bit too much information for me to take in at this point. Izuku nodded. I know the feeling. Get me a notebook and a pen and I'll write it all down. Eraserhead frowned but pulled out a small 100-yen notebook and pen from his belt and handed them over. Izuku grinned up at Eraserhead. Demon, can I get a fifth of whiskey with that too? No drinking until you're of age, came Eraserhead's automatic reply. 13. Legal age. 14. Legal age. 16. For F's sake, fine. Eraserhead looked like he was regretting ever leaving the house that morning. It's so sad, you know? Izuku said as he flipped open the notebook. Eraserhead tilted his head in a silent question. I had a 50,000 yen bottle of whiskey, 30 years old, single malt that I was going to have with dinner on Friday night last loop. I died on Thursday. When I see the assholes that killed me in this loop, it's gonna be on sight for the both of them. Eraserhead actually chuckled. Izuku beamed at getting someone to laugh at his jokes. Yeah, it's been years, but he never quite tamped down on his people-pleasing tendencies. Or his muttering habit, though he at least just mouthed the words to himself now. Most of the time. Okay, he forced himself back on topic by opening the notebook up to the first page. What do you want to know? What do you think I should know? Izuku hummed in thought before starting to write. He had only filled up 3 pages when he heard a loud shout. Hey, Deku! Izuku looked up to see Kaken glaring at Eraserhead, looking ready to blow him up if he so much as breathed the wrong way. Ah, it seems he'd realized that Izuku was no longer walking with them. What are you doing? Mum and Auntie said we shouldn't annoy the homeless people. Izuku couldn't stop back a snicker at the look on Eraserhead's face as he glared down at Kaken, though his amusement was dampened by the fact he would have to put his cheery little kid mask back on. I'm not annoying him, he exclaimed loudly, pitching his voice up and throwing his hands out for emphasis. Eraserhead cleared his throat. He isn't annoying me, and I'm not homeless, either. Kaken gave the man a long look that said, I don't believe you, before turning his attention back to Izuku. Even if he isn't homeless, you shouldn't be talking to strangers. Izuku smiled. Okay. He clumsily hopped off of the bench before turning and handing the notebook and pen back to Eraserhead with a bow. Goodbye, Aizawa-san. He turned around without waiting for a response before trotting after Kaken. Kaken huffed before turning. As the two left the park, Izuku knew that Eraserhead would no doubt find him again and try to get answers. Show you to flip through the pages the kid, whatever, had filled out. Jesus Christ. So the 2 main things I'll need help with is finding Shimura Tenko Shigaraki Tamura before All for One. Extracting the Todoroki family from under Endeavor's thumb. Also, I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to do it this time round, but the Hero Commission also needs to go down, so if you want to help with that, that would be appreciated. Show you decide. The brat had written out addresses for the Shimura household and the Todoroki estate as well as instructions. Endeavor hid the receipts for his wife, what the F, in a safe behind a painting in his home office, and Midoriya had written down the passcode for it. He didn't even want to know how he got that. The brat had only written down one of the steps of his 12-step plan to take down the hero commission when the blonde brat had called him away. Step 1 being, give Mum's computer an upgrade, whatever that meant. Shoyuta wished he could follow the brat and demand more answers. He sat there on the bench for a while as he planned out his next move. Now there's an idea. Izuku was once again walking home from kindergarten when he got the feeling that he was being watched. The only difference now was that Izuku was walking alone and nursing a few bruises and burns. His appointment with Dr. Tsubasa, Garaki, whatever his real name is, had happened 2 weeks ago and he had been declared quirkless. And like all the other times this had happened, no one wanted to be friends with Izuku anymore. Which was totally fine. It meant that he could focus more on leaving the world a better place when he died for real this time. Once again, Izuku took a turn into the park and sat down on a bench, waiting for Eraserhead to catch up. He showed up a minute later, casually strolling into the park with his hands in his pockets as he made his way to where Izuku sat. He sat down on the bench next to Izuku and immediately pulled 2 things out of his pockets, a flip phone and a charger. He handed them over to Izuku and Izuku grinned. A burner phone? Hell yeah, I haven't used one of these in ages. The only number in it is mine. I want you to use this so we can coordinate and pass along information, Eraserhead explained as Izuku booted it up. The phone's design was quite nostalgic. Izuku used something similar during his time as an underground hero. He had grown quite fond of them over the years. Even if they're a pain to type on, the buttons are useful for texting without having to look at the screen. So you're gonna help me? Izuku asked, looking up from the phone. Eraserhead nodded. If you're telling the truth and the number 2 hero is abusing his family, he needs to be stopped. Sweet, Izuku cheered. Having someone who looks like an adult will make some things so much easier. Looks like an adult. I am an adult. Eraserhead grumbled under his breath. Izuku looked through the phone, noting the only contact in the phone was just the phone number and had no name or photo to go with it. Izuku easily fixed that. Seriously? I didn't take you for the type to use emojis, Eraserhead asked as Izuku saved the contact under a sloth emoji. I mean, it suits you. You have dark eye bags, nap a lot but can also be terrifying when you want to be, Izuku shrugged. So have you had a chance to look into the Todoroki and Shimura families? Eraserhead sighed and shook his head. I don't have enough clout to accuse the number 2 hero of abuse, so I've been staking out the estate when I've had time. The Shimuras, on the other hand, all disappeared one night without a trace a few years ago and the case has gone cold. Izuku nodded. I thought that might be the case. He bit his lip as he thought. This was the worst part about his quirk, the helplessness of being 4 years old with no connections to the hero world, no credibility, and a quirk that he couldn't prove existed. He had learned early on that at this stage that if he wanted anything to get done he needed to somehow get someone else to do it for him, at least for a few years. It frustrated him to no end. It would be a gamble to contact him this early, but he didn't see any other way that didn't involve waiting around for 5 years. He hovered over the new contact button. Is this untraceable? It should be close enough. Why? Izuku hummed. I know a guy who should be able to help find Shimura. Only problem is that if I text him, he has the motive and resources to track me down. Eraserhead sat up straight at that. Is he some kind of informant? A hacker? Izuku thought of the time he had to teach the man in question how to use a smartphone and started laughing. God no. But he is powerful and could track me down no problem. Eraserhead looked like he was fighting a war with himself. Just how important is this Shimura kid? Izuku pursed his lips. Very. Eraserhead sighed before digging his own phone out of one of the pouches on his belt. If I use my own phone to contact this guy, I won't have to change my number, will I? Huh. Izuku didn't understand. Is this person opposed to heroes? He asked. When Izuku shook his head, Eraserhead continued. Then I'll contact this person as Eraserhead on behalf of my anonymous informant. So what's his number? Izuku was touched by how much trust Eraserhead must already have for him to be doing this for him. Izuku rattled off the number by heart. Tell him that Shimura Kotaro and his family are missing and that he might be the only one who can find them. Eraserhead tapped away at the phone before showing the message to Izuku to approve. Izuku nodded. Yeah, that should do it. Eraserhead pressed send right as Izuku came to a realization. Oh, yeah, and if a detective comes up to you and starts asking you how you got that number, remember that he probably has a lie-detecting quirk, so it's better to say, no comment, instead of lying, since if you lie he'll know what you said isn't true and he can use this along with deduction and the process of elimination to figure out the truth. I'm sorry, what? Eraserhead asked. Yeah, I probably should have told you before you sent that, but yeah. Izuku chuckled nervously. Just who exactly did I text? I swear to God, if I end up stuffed into a suitcase and thrown into the bay? You're not in danger. Izuku rushed to assure him. Well, at least from this guy, Izuku amended. Besides, if you die you won't really die, because without your quirk to stop me from coming back I'll just wake up a month ago the next time I die and you'll still be alive. Eraserhead was looking a little green. So, these guys won't track me down and murder me? Track you down? Murder you? No. Eraserhead sighed. Okay, just. Can you at least tell me who this person is? Izuku thought about it. He is a very private person. If he chooses to reveal himself to you then okay, but if not then no. Eraserhead huffed. Fine. Any other proverbial bombs you want to drop on me before I leave to await the interrogation? Izuku thought for a moment. Not off of the top of my head? Wait. He paused. My pediatric quirk specialist has connections to the villain known as All for One. Should have probably mentioned that earlier. Did it just slip your mind? Eraserhead asked sarcastically. Izuku crossed his arms. I'm sorry, I've been a little busy lately, tossing up the pros and cons of meddling with certain events and trying to anticipate the effects that these events will cause so I don't accidentally start the apocalypse, 'cause have you ever lived through an apocalypse? Let me tell you, it is very unfun, so I'm trying to avoid that, not just for my sake but for everyone else's too. Okay, forget I said anything, Eraserhead cut him off, grumbling as he pulled out his notebook and a pen. Tell me who this quirk specialist is so I can tell the men in black when they come for me. Izuku told him everything he knew about the man, all his aliases and where he worked. Oh, and if you can't find anything on the guy to lock him up you can probably arrest him for malpractice. Yeah, sure. Eraserhead said, sounding tired. He finished writing everything down before scrubbing at his face with his empty hand. Anything else you want to share? Izuku shook his head. If I think of something else I'll text you. Go home and take a nap or something. Oh, and say, hi, to present Mike for me too. Eraserhead tucked everything back into his belt before standing, waving a hand at Izuku. Yeah, whatever, kid. If I don't text you by the end of the week, just assume I'm dead. Izuku chuckled. Sure. Eraserhead stalked off and Izuku got up to continue his walk back home. Hopefully Toshinori wouldn't be too hard on Eraserhead. Toshinori stared down at the little blinking light on his personal phone. He had a text message from an unknown number. No one had texted his personal number in months, since the people who had his number knew it was easier to get a hold of him through his work number. He tried to think of who would have texted him and came up blank. There was only one way to figure out who it was. He opened the text. This is Pro Hero Eraserhead. An anonymous informant has requested that I pass along the following message to this number. Shimura Kotaro and his family are all missing and you're the only one who can find them. Toshinori blanched. With shaking hands, he pulled out his work phone and called his sidekick. Mirai answered after only 2 rings. Yes. Mirai, I'll be at the agency in 5. There is something important we must discuss immediately. Shoyuta wasn't surprised when he answered the door to find a detective on his doorstep less than 24 hours after he sent the text. He simply closed his eyes before letting out a long sigh. When he opened them again, the detective was watching him with a wary look on his face. Shoyuta just shrugged. I was warned this might happen. He checked the time on his watch and saw that Hizashi's shift wouldn't end for another few hours. That should hopefully give him enough time to get this over with and come back home before Hizashi. He pulled on his shoes, glad he didn't bother changing out of his hero costume before his post-patrol nap, and stepped outside, locking the door behind him. The detective watched him in poorly disguised surprise before clearing his throat. "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me so you can answer a few questions." Shoyuta grunted in accession as he looked the detective up and down. He looked vaguely familiar with his dark hair and tan trench coat. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. "You're that detective with the lie detector quirk, right?" The man blinked in surprise before nodding. "Yes, that's me." Among the cars parked in front of the apartment building, Shoyuta spied a navy blue sedan with windows dark enough to nearly match the paint job. That was the car that the detective led him toward, because of course it was. The detective placed a hand on the back door handle but paused and turned to Shoyuta. "Before we start, I have to ask, are you aware of exactly who you contacted?" Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. "No, my informant refused to tell me." "Ah." The detective nodded, knocking once against the door in what could have almost passed as an accident if Shoyuta wasn't paying attention to each and every move the detective made. The detective opened the door and gestured for Shoyuta to climb in. Shoyuta hesitated for a moment but figured that the detective wouldn't take no for an answer. Once inside the car, Shoyuta was able to get a look at the other occupants of the vehicle. The man sitting next to him in the back seat was huge, towering over Shoyuta even while he sat down. He was wearing a tight black shirt and khaki shorts. Shoyuta noticed the wisps of short blonde hair escaping out the back under his cap before accidentally making eye contact. The man was staring at Shoyuta over his sunglasses with piercing blue eyes that pinned Shoyuta into place with their intensity. With his bright blue eyes, chiseled jaw and bodybuilder physique, he looked one part strip club bouncer and one part male esthétique. Tearing his gaze away from the man, he looked to the occupied seat in front of him. This man was also tall, though he looked closer to your everyday office worker with the gray suit and glasses. If it wasn't for the way his suit failed to completely hide his musculature. Shoyuta wouldn't be surprised if the man was some kind of secret agent for the government. With a quick suspicious glare at the man's green hair, Shoyuta briefly wondered if this man was related to Midoriya but quickly dismissed the thought. The detective climbed into the driver's seat then, and they were off. Shoyuta leaned back in his seat to try to get comfortable. He could almost smell the long and uncomfortable conversation that was about to happen. Thankfully, he didn't have to wait long for the man in the suit to speak. "Aizawa Shoyuta, hero name Eraserhead. An underground hero who's been making waves since your debut fresh out of UA's hero course. Currently dating fellow pro hero Present Mike, also known as Yamada Hizashi. We took a look at your known affiliates and couldn't figure out how you came across the phone number you used to contact one of my associates, so why don't you enlighten us?" He said all of this without even glancing up, raising Shuta's hackles. Shoyuta let his head fall back to bounce a little against the upholstery. "What part of an anonymous informant is unclear to you? How did you meet this informant?" The blond man asked, having turned his whole upper body towards Shoyuta to get a better look at him. His voice was quiet, like he was purposefully making sure not to startle Shoyuta or something, yet it still cut through the conversation. The bright blue eyes Shoyuta had noticed earlier were unblinking as he stared Shoyuta down, and Shoyuta was brave enough to admit that it was intimidating. "They showed up at my apartment at 6 in the morning one day completely unannounced and asked for my help on a matter unrelated to the Shimura case." "Truth," the detective called from the driver's seat without looking away from the road. "And you just decided to trust them?" Blondie asked, his voice still hushed. Shoyuta stared at the man with his patented unsettling look. "I have my reasons." Looking appropriately perturbed, Blondie cleared his throat before he continued. "Did they say anything about the Shimura family and why they want to find them?" Shoyuta pulled out his notepad, the one that Midoriya had scribbled in, and flipped to the page on Tenko. "The whole Shimura family sans Tenko is dead, victims of Tenko's traumatic quirk manifestation. Tenko is now in danger from..." He squinted at the little acronym Midoriya had written down. It seemed almost familiar, but Shoyuta couldn't place what the letters AFO stood for at that moment, so he just settled on, "A villain." The blond man gasped. "How can you be sure that your informant is correct?" His voice raised a couple of decibels before Suit sent him a glare, making him lower his voice again. Besides the fact that after passing along the information, my informant told me that I would likely be picked up by a detective with a lie detector quirk and questioned about how I got that number? Shoyuta asked dryly. When I expressed my concerns about the person I was contacting, they made sure to reassure me that I won't be left to decompose in a landfill afterwards, so I am really hoping that his information remains as accurate as it has proven to be, Shoyuta tacked on with a long deadpan stare directed at the blonde man, who was looking rather uncomfortable. Shoyuta could see Suit's eye twitch in the rearview mirror, and Shoyuta couldn't tell if it was from amusement or if this man was actually just a hairbreadth away from murdering Shoyuta. Blondie cleared his throat. No, you don't need to worry about that. Now that we no longer have any doubts about the accuracy of my informant's information, they told me that when you come to pick me up and interrogate me, I should mention that a pediatric quirk specialist operating in Mizutofu has connections to a villain known as. Shoyuta trailed off when he failed to recall the name, before flipping to the page of his notepad he had written the info down on, skimming it. He frowned when he saw the name. It was a rather odd one. All for one. Ah, that must be what the acronym stood for. Three heads whipped around to gape at Shoyuta, who glared at the detective. Eyes on the road. The detective turned back to the road, correcting their course before pulling over. Where did you hear that name? Suit demanded, only now bothering to look at Shoyuta when he addressed him. My informant, Shoyuta said stiffly. The whole car was tense like a trap ready to be sprung, and Shoyuta had to make a conscious effort to prevent himself from activating his quirk. Your informant? The blonde asked, his face stony and voice taking on an edge of steel. What is their name? I can't answer that, Shoyuta replied. What do they look like? Suit demanded. Shuta's hand crept towards his capture weapon. I am not going to compromise the identity of my informant. The blonde scrutinized Shoyuta. We need to make sure that you weren't approached by a villain. Shoyuta thought of Midoriya's wide eyes and chubby cheeks as he stood on Shuta's doorstep in his all-might onesie. Trust me, they're not a villain. He paused for a second as he thought. He could probably share this one thing. It's not like they could possibly be able to lead it back to Midoriya. They're a retired pro-hero. That's all you're getting out of me. What was their hero name? Suit immediately asked. What did I just say? Shoyuta asked Suit with a sharp look. If I may, the blonde asked, suddenly looking apprehensive, did this informant happen to be between 3 and 4 feet tall? Shoyuta stiffened. There was no way he had heard that correctly. What? The blonde man was starting to look like he had liked a lemon. And did he have gray hair? What the hell? Shoyuta remembered Midoriya's advice about not giving information away. No comment. The man stared at Shoyuta for a few seconds before visibly deflating. I am so sorry, Eraserhead-san. Tsukachi, I believe there has been a misunderstanding. Eraserhead does not appear to be a threat. Both the detective and Suit shared a look. I'm sorry, what? I'll second that. Shoyuta had no idea what was going on. We should have realized, there are only so many people who know of All for One's existence. We should have realized who your informant was when he refused to contact me himself. Suit blinked. Wait, you think the informant is Gran? Plausible deniability, the blonde almost shouted, cutting Suit off. We officially know nothing about this informant's identity, and we should keep it that way. He rushed out. Shoyuta was so lost that he wasn't sure that he could figure out the heads nor tails of this conversation even with a map. At this point, he was too afraid to ask for clarification. As long as these people stopped asking about his informant and let him go home, that was fine with him. Suit finally seemed to get the memo and asked no further questions about his informant, instead of asking about the info Midoriya had given him. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. Are you in charge of the task force to bring All for One down? He hazarded a guess. The blonde smiled wryly. Something like that. Rest assured that anything you tell us will not leave this circle. Shoyuta nodded. Some ID would be nice to see, but he guessed he'd just have to live without. With all the secrecy around the owner of the phone number's identity and this villain, it was probably safer for him to know only what he needed to know. He didn't need to end up on some sort of secret government watch list or something. Shoyuta happily gave them all the info he had about the Shimuras and the quirk specialist, and in no time he was being dropped off outside of his apartment. Once again, I am so very sorry about this. We could have gone about this better. Shoyuta cut him off with a raised hand. It's fine. No harm, no foul. As long as they let him escape into his apartment without further questioning, everything would be okay. If your informant gives you any more information on All for One and his associates, you know how to contact us, the blonde said solemnly. Oh, and one last question. Suit cut in. Shoyuta sighed and prayed for patience. Yes. I've been wondering about why your informant would contact you of all people to pass on this information. This information is delicate, and knowing it will put a target on your back. So why did he choose you? Shoyuta glared at the side of Suit's head. This guy's attitude was really getting on Shuta's nerves. Shoyuta had to word his answer carefully. My informant contacted me because he felt my quirk would be useful. True, the detective piped up from the front seat. Oh, and what is your quirk? Suist. For the first time in the whole conversation, he actually looked at Shoyuta. Shoyuta grit his teeth. Erasure. I can erase quirks as long as I am looking at their users. Suit's face went slack with shock. You can erase multiple quirks at once? He asked eagerly. As long as I'm looking at them, Shoyuta replied stiffly. Suit and Blonde exchanged a significant look before Suit turned back to Shoyuta. We'll be in contact with you soon. He bid the men a final goodbye before getting out of the car and shutting the door with perhaps a touch too much force. As he stepped into the lobby, he heard the car take off and Shoyuta breathed a sigh of relief. Once he got to his apartment, he closed the door behind him, kicking off his boots before flopping down on the couch. He still had a bit of time before Hisashi came home, so he had all the privacy he could need to make this call. He pulled up his contacts and clicked on the one titled Brat and waited for it to connect. Midoriya picked up on the fifth ring. Sup? Shoyuta glowered at the wall. I have some questions. Oh, did they just drop you off? What did they tell you? Pretty much nothing. They freaked out when I dropped All for One's name, but that's it. They didn't tell me who they were or give me any names. Midoriya hummed. That sounds about right. So what questions do you have? Shoyuta tossed up between which one to ask first. They kept asking me about your identity, especially once I mentioned All for One. They started asking some weird questions. Like what? Shoyuta frowned. There was this one guy, he was blonde and looked kind of like a meathead, and he started asking me if you were between 3 and 4 feet tall with gray hair. He was cut off by a weird huffing sound. Huh. I told him, no comment, and he started apologizing and talking about plausible deniability before driving me straight back home. Midoriya started giggling on the other end. Oh my god. They think I'm... There was a rustling, then muffled laughter. Shoyuta huffed. What's so funny? Midoriya sounded breathless when he answered. They think I'm someone else. They'll figure it out eventually, but until they do, this is going to be hilarious. Shoyuta grit his teeth. A little bit of context would be nice. Who even are they anyway? Who showed up to interrogate you? Midoriya shot back, his voice going back to normal. They never gave me any names. There was a man in a tan trench coat. The detective. Tsukachi, yeah, that sounds right. Shoyuta rolled his eyes over being interrupted. Who else? There was a man with green hair in a suit and glasses, and a blonde man in a t-shirt and khakis. Midoriya hummed on the other end. Ah, yeah, I know those guys. Shoyuta was getting frustrated at the lack of information. Just who were they? Are they some sort of secret government agents? Midoriya laughed. No. They do work for the government, but they're not the shady kind. Is the green-haired one your father? Shoyuta had to ask. Shoyuta heard a choking sound before there was the sound of keyboard keys clicking. There was some sort of noise in the background that sounded like voices, and Shoyuta wondered what Midoriya was doing. Oh my god, Midoriya whispered, sounding strangled. In all my years no one has ever asked me that, so congrats. Midoriya snickered before there was a sound of rustling and more muffled laughter. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. He was just so glad that the immortal toddler found him so funny. There was a sound of something moving around in the background, and then he could hear All Might calling out his catchphrase. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. What are you doing? Oh, my mum thinks I'm watching All Might's debut. When I was a kid, she'd just put me in front of the computer and put the video on loop to keep me occupied for a few hours so she could take a nap. I'm not a kid anymore, but I won't say no to unsupervised internet access. That I really didn't need to know that. There was a pause. Then, get your head out of the gutter. I have way more important things to be doing, like hypothetically hacking into certain classified databases and taking down government institutions. You're doing what? Oh, don't sound so surprised. I literally told you I was going to do this when we first met. Shoyuta stared at the wall clock above the TV. It was a cat-themed one Hisashi had gotten him as a GG gift for their 6-month anniversary. From the bottom of it hung a cat's tail that moved back and forth with every tick of the clock. He counted 10 ticks of the clock before saying, I thought you were joking. Eraserhead, I joke about many things, like my absent father and Endeavor being a flaming heap of trash, but I would never joke about taking down the government. Shoyuta let out a little noise of concern. What if you get caught? Relax, I won't get caught. Besides, what are the HPSC gonna do if they show up to my house? Arrest me? I'm 4 years old. How are you even going to hack into the Hero Commission? Shoyuta was struggling to wrap his head around all this. The mental image of 2 men in black trying to put Midoriya in cuffs that were way too big for him while he wore his All Might onesie wasn't helping things. Oh, you think I lived this long and didn't pick up a few tips and tricks along the way? Midoriya. My mum woke up and she'll come to fetch me soon. Bye. The little sheet hung up on him. Shoyuta stared down at his phone as the screen blinked before shutting it off and throwing an arm over his eyes. Hisashi found him in that exact position half an hour later when he came home and, like the actual saint he was, said nothing and just picked Shoyuta up and carried him to the bed for cuddles. With Hisashi's chin tucking into Shuta's hair and his arms around Shuta's waist, he couldn't help but think of Midoriya's words. Married to Yamada Hisashi sounds really nice right now. Shoyuta was going to have to get a ring, wasn't he? So, Tashinori, Naomasa and Mirai sat in Tashinori's kitchen, each with a mug of coffee, or in Tashinori's case, a cup of green tea. On the table, Aizawa Shuta's file lay spread out in front of them. So, Tashinori echoed before taking a sip of his tea. They sat there in silence for a while. Tashinori stared down at Aizawa's Hero License ID photo. He looked so unassuming. Just a regular man who, admittedly, looked like he needed a nap. In the 3 years since the photo was taken, the dark circles under his eyes had only grown more pronounced. Finally, Mirai closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. Oh my god. Aizawa Shoyuta has been a pro hero for 3 years with the perfect quirk to single-handedly take down All for One, and we only just found out because Gran Torino practically placed him in our laps. Tashinori swallowed. We're going to have to bring him into the task force. Naomasa cleared his throat. I know he's a pro hero, but having a quirk like that, he'll be in danger if All for One ever finds out about him. Tashinori exchanged a glance with Mirai. His eyes were wide. We need to protect him. After the interrogation, Izuka didn't see Eraserhead for a couple of months, though they texted weekly to exchange updates. And by that, he meant Eraser would text him at ungodly hours of the morning with status updates and the occasional rant, while Izuku told him only as much as he needed to know about what Izuku was doing, so the man had some measure of plausible deniability. Their plans were progressing well so far. On the night the Hero Billboard rankings were announced, when Endeavor would be guaranteed to be on the other side of the city for at least a few hours, Eraser had taken the opportunity to get in contact with Ray without having to worry about Endeavor walking in on them. Ray seemed skeptical that anyone would actually want to help her and her kids, but Eraser seemed to be slowly gaining her trust by going over to the Todoroki estate and having coffee with her when he could. He'd almost been caught by Endeavor one time when he came home unexpectedly after forgetting something, and Eraser had had to sneak past him and out of the house. Izuku wished he could have seen that, but had simply had to make do with Eraser's rather dry and unenthusiastic account. Izuku couldn't help but picture the affair looking like a scene from a soap drama where the lonely housewife's lover has to hide from the intimidating husband who unexpectedly comes home from work. Izuku may or may not have nearly choked to death on his juice as he pictured Eraser hiding in a closet like he had seen in one particularly memorable soap he had watched at one point in university. Eraser has also been in contact with the Three Stooges, though Eraser was still in the dark about their identities. They apparently hadn't even told him their names, so Eraser had to make do with calling them Suit and Blondie. With the might of the All Might agency behind the search, the team were able to slap Tenko's face everywhere, on missing posters, billboards and even milk cartons, which had led to a single confirmed sighting in Hosu but that had been weeks ago with no new lead since. Izuku had also been busy. He wasn't lying when he told Eraser that he wasn't hacking into the Hero Commission. He had been far too busy at the time fitting out his mom's computer with all the software he needed to make it near untraceable first. He couldn't die on schedule if he was locked away in a cell, or worse, disappeared in the middle of the night by men in black just to wake back up at his kindergarten once again. With his mom's computer now untraceable, he spent around a week spending all of his spare time on the computer working on accessing the Hero Commission's database. To do this, Izuku had to first get access to the computer of the head of the IT department. Tanaka-san had been Izuku's direct superior when he worked at the Hero Commission in their IT department, and he was a nasty piece of work. A generally unpleasant man both in attitude and just to be near in general, considering the man seemed to think that personal hygiene was optional. Izuku had spent hours staring at the man's wedding band, silently wondering just how he had gotten anyone to marry him while smelling like that. Tanaka-san's favorite pastimes included passing all of the blame of his mistakes onto Izuku while simultaneously taking the credit for Izuku's biggest achievements, which had eventually resulted in Izuku getting fired. Izuku had to say, it was quite disappointing that it took the Hero Commission a whole 2 months and 5 separate catastrophic computer issues to figure out exactly what had been going on. By the time they tried to hire him back, however, Izuku had already found a nice position working with the police as a consultant on cybercrimes. Though working with the police didn't come with the same financial perks as working with the Hero Commission, the constant supply of muffins, Izuku wasn't sure if he believed in a god, but if there was one out there, then God bless Chief Tsurugame's wife, because those muffins were literally the only thing keeping him going some days, and the general atmosphere at the station. Tsurugame ran a tight ship, but it was friendly and close-knit. Those years he worked at the station, it was like having a second family, more than made up for it. Now, while Tanaka-san hadn't been quite as good at his job as Izuku, he had still been Izuku's biological senior by 20 years and had a lot of working experience, so Izuku had worried about how successful his attempts would be. Thankfully, Izuku had an unfortunately good memory at his disposal, because Izuku knew that the top-notch security software the Commission used sent him patch updates that he had to install every few weeks. Using this knowledge, Izuku made a dummy email account to make the security update look legitimate, going so far as to steal a couple of graphics. Then he wrote an actual patch program for it, hiding a rootkit in it so that when Tanaka-san downloaded the patch, the rootkit would give Izuku total access to Tanaka-san's computer and by extension, the Hero Commission's database. This ended up taking a week since his mum was getting worried about his screen time and was trying to limit his time on the computer. But then it was time for the moment of truth. Izuku sent the email to Tanaka-san's work email address. Only 19 hours after Izuku sent the email, Tanaka-san downloaded the patch program. Izuku pumped his fist. Even after all this time, he still had it. Once he had control of Tanaka-san's computer, actually getting into the database was easy. He ended up filling up a USB stick with evidence of the Hero Commission's wrongdoing, files on Hero cover-ups, files on the legacy program, and most damning of all, files on the Commission's small assassination cell they sent after people, heroes and civilians alike, who committed crimes like being at the wrong place at the wrong time and seeing things they shouldn't have. The USB had been a little difficult to acquire. He'd needed to wait until his mum sent him to the Lawsons down the street with a couple thousand yen for eggs and a sweet for himself to shoplift the USB stick, but it had been worth it. With that safely tucked away in the back of his sock drawer, stuffed inside a pair of Endeavor socks that he never wore, he continued working his 12-step plan to take down the Hero Commission. Step 2 had been accessing their database and copying all of their juicy, incriminating files. Step 3 was leaking the contents of the files bit by bit to the public to shake the public's faith in them. He started by compiling a bunch of dossiers on different heroes using their status to get away with their crimes and asking why the Hero Commission, the institution supposedly formed to keep heroes in line, hadn't done anything about them. Then he posted these dossiers on every single social media platform out there. Sure, it wasn't quite that simple since most social media took his posts down, but Izuku kept going, making new posts. Then when they disabled his accounts, he simply made new ones and posted on there too. Then a week after his first post, other people joined in, helping spread the dossiers until a local journalist caught wind of the situation and did some investigation before posting their own story, backing up Izuku's claims. He had only gone after low-ranking or unranked heroes so far, and of those, few would probably face charges, but an investigation had been opened into Izuku by the Hero Commission. Izuku found out about it as he was perusing the Hero Commission's database for anything new. And also to keep tabs on how Hawks was doing, because Izuku may or may not have become attached during a work study he had done with the man during one of his early loops. He found out during his search that some of their files on their database had disappeared, notably the ones on the assassinations, which left Izuku glad he had saved all that evidence beforehand. At least he could still find encrypted progress reports on Hawks, even if they were disturbing. He saved the progress reports to the USB. Now that Izuku had a few different people backing him up online, it was more important than ever to keep compiling the dossiers whenever he had the chance, going so far as to painstakingly type them out on his flip phone in the Notes app when he didn't have access to the computer. He really did miss having his own computer sometimes. Like when his mum snuck up behind him as he was working on a report on a local pro hero in rural Hokkaido who had been extorting the people in his area by demanding a protection fee, like some sort of 2-bit yakuza. Normally the Hero Commission wouldn't bother covering it up, but it seemed the hero had been giving the local commission branch a cut of the fees. It was only due to 1 part skill and 2 parts sheer dumb luck that Izuku had deleted the whole thing before his mum could read it. If he went on like this, it would only be a matter of time before he slipped up, so he had to clean up his act and lay low for a while, and that meant disposing of the evidence. That's why Izuku was sitting on the park bench after school, wiggling the USB stick free from its spot in his shoe as he waited for Eraserhead to show up. He had had to hide it in his shoe since it was always around this age that the other students would start rifling through his backpack and trashing his stuff. They hadn't done that today, thankfully, only beating him up. Well, as much as a bunch of 5-year-olds could beat someone up. The park was quiet and empty except for a couple of pigeons who were not so subtly looking for food. Izuku shook his head at them sadly as they cooed at him. Not today. Izuku checked to see if his nose had stopped bleeding yet when Eraserhead finally showed up, looking like he just rolled out of bed. As he got closer, Izuku noticed he was looking kind of pale, and he was staring at Izuku. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked as he came close enough. Izuku looked down and grimaced when he saw blood on his shirt. That would be a pain to hide from his mum. "Oh, a couple kids beat me up," Izuku shrugged. "Anyways, Are you okay?" "What kids? Why were they beating you up?" Eraserhead interrupted him as he sat next to Izuku and began to examine his face. Izuku rolled his eyes. "I'm fine, I've been through worse." A bunch of 5-year-olds could hardly hold a candle to being slowly disintegrated by a mass murderer, or being suffocated by slime, or being burned to death. Why were they beating you up? Eraserhead was frowning. "I have the extra pinky toe joints, I'm medically quirkless, and it's not like I could tell them the truth. Of course they're gonna beat me up." Izuku shrugged. Eraserhead's face pinched. "Have you told your teachers about this?" Izuku began to laugh, which just made his eyes water and his whole face throb. "Oh no, I don't need to, they know all about it. I heard them making bets on which kid will finally hurt me enough to make me cry the other day." Eraserhead looked like someone had just gutted a kitten in front of him. That's not." He took a deep breath. "Are you serious?" Izuku shrugged again. "Yeah, they do this every time." Eraserhead's hair started to stir, though there was no breeze. "What else do they do?" "My teachers do the usual, I guess. Most of it's just a lot of gaslighting, to be honest. Or telling me that things aren't that bad." Izuku put on a high nasally voice. "They're only hurting you because you react. Stop being such a crybaby and they'll get bored. Pay attention, Midoriya." Someone in your position needs all the help they can get in life. Or the classic, don't you know that there are people out there who have it so much worse than you? You should be thankful for the life you have, which, yeah, is technically true but… Izuku sighed. It's not really something you should be saying to a 7-year-old who's crying because he just got beat up and had his lunch stolen. You know, stuff like that. Eraserhead's eyes flickered from black to red and back again, like the lights in the haunted house attraction at the fair. Izuku watched in fascination. Are those all things your teachers have said to you? Izuku gently prodded at his ribs where he had been kicked. It didn't hurt too bad, thankfully, but it would bruise. A lot of it isn't verbatim, but you get the gist. Eraserhead closed his eyes and leaned back in his seat, taking a few deep and measured breaths in and out. That is, and I cannot stress this enough, incredibly effed up. Izuku kicked his feet back and forth as he looked down at the ground. I know, but it's not like I can do anything about it. He had tried during his second loop. The only thing it had resulted in was being barred from attending all the schools in Mizudafu and surrounding districts. It had nearly been enough to stop him from getting into UA. Almost. A letter of recommendation from the #1 hero in the country was a hell of a thing. He told Eraserhead as much. When Izuku finished, Eraserhead's eyes snapped open and his hair shot up. His eyes were glowing a solid red. He stared off into the distance for a few seconds before he blinked, letting his hair fall. Izuku had only ever seen his former sensei's quirk activate due to strong emotions a handful of times through the years, the last time being of course when he threatened Mike. I've never taken down a school district before, but I guess there's a first for everything. What? Izuku squeaked embarrassingly. Midoriya, what they're doing to you isn't right and they need to be stopped. I know, but nothing. You're probably not the only kid being mistreated like this, and if I don't do something about this I may as well hand my hero license in. Eraserhead held firm against Izuku's protests. Izuku bit his lip. But last time I did this, nothing happened. Even with all of the knowledge and skills Izuku had amassed over the decades, it didn't matter when no one was willing to take a quirkless child seriously. Eraserhead let a savage grin cross his face. But did you have a licensed pro hero on your side that time? Izuku opened his mouth and then closed it. He crossed his arms. We should be focusing on other things like the Todorokis and Tenko. You think those guys you sicked on me can't handle the Shimura kid by themselves? Eraserhead asked with a raised eyebrow. Izuku uncrossed his arms to gesture with them. But the Todorokis? What about them? I was going to tell you earlier, but I was distracted. Eraserhead started with a small smile. Ray called me yesterday. She's ready to leave. Tonight I'm going to rent a couple of vans and check out the safe house we're going to be keeping them in. It's a little small but it should do. Then tomorrow after Endeavor has left for work I'll drop by and help her pack up the last of their stuff and get them out of there. Izuku grinned. That's amazing. Is there anything I can do to help? Eraserhead shook his head. It's all being taken care of. I've called in a few favors so a few different pros will be there as backup in case things go south. You don't need to do anything except let me make sure your teachers don't hurt anyone else. Izuku slouched into the bench. I'll think about it, but only after Rei-chan and her kids are safe. Eraserhead didn't look particularly happy but still agreed. Deal. Who's on the team? Izuku asked. He didn't know much about the pros currently with the MLA, but he could cross-reference easily enough. Hizashi and Nimue, Midnight were easy to convince. I also reached out to Tensei, Ingenium, but he's busy, but he's sending a couple of trusted sidekicks. He rattled off a couple of names, some that Izuku recognized and some that Izuku didn't. Izuku would have to look into them once he got home, but he also somehow got into contact with… Eraserhead shuddered, Ms. Joke. Izuku perked up at the familiar names as his mind raced with possibilities. This could be interesting. The corners of his lips curled up in a sly smile. Eraserhead was watching him with concern now, which just made Izuku want to smile wider. Instead, he forced his face to relax and change the subject. Anyways, don't you want to know why I asked you to come here? Eraserhead relaxed, obviously letting down his guard. Yeah, sure, what's up? Izuku grinned. I think my mom's getting worried about how much time I'm spending on the computer and I don't want her finding any evidence of what I'm doing, so he handed the USB over to Eraserhead, who took it with no small amount of trepidation. Here's what I've been doing lately. Keep this safe. What exactly is on this? Oh, you know, Izuku waved his hand dismissively. Proof of the Hero Commission's corruption, files from their child soldier program, the usual. What the F dash? Eraserhead whispered as he stared down at the innocent little USB in his palm. Eraserhead sighed. Do you happen to have anything to do with the dossiers being spread around on social media? From the looks of it, Eraser already knew the answer to that particular question. Izuku just smiled at him, happy he had been able to distract Eraserhead from taking down his school district. Shoyuta wasn't blind, nor was he stupid. So when he saw a small figure lurking in the trees on the Todoroki estate the next day as he helped the family pack their possessions into the moving van, he let out an annoyed sigh. Rei, she had insisted that he call her that, immediately stiffened, straightening up from where she was helping pack Fuyumi's backpack into the back of the van to stand by Shoyuta. Is everything all right? She asked, barely loud enough for Shoyuta to hear her and certainly quiet enough not to be heard by the children who were squabbling over who got to sit where in the van. We have company. Rei asigidi in a breath. NG. She breathed. The sidekick standing guard by the van stiffened at her quiet whisper. Shoyuta shook his head. No. The colleague of mine decided to pay a visit. He sighed again and scrubbed a hand over his face before pulling out his phone. After only 2 rings, the person on the other end picked up. Around the same time the figure in the trees retreated back into the dark shadows the canopy provided and disappeared from sight. Why are you here? And how did you get past the perimeter? I just wanted to check in on the family. Shoyuta was thrown for a second by the voice. He almost didn't think that it was actually Midoriya on the other end for a second. The voice was far too deep and occasionally crackled with static. He quickly pulled himself together. Really? And you couldn't have just waited until, I don't know, we were done here? Nemuri had drifted closer, still holding a moving box as she very obviously eavesdropped on the conversation. I don't know where the safe house is, and would you have told me if I asked? Midoriya whined. Shoyuta gritted his teeth because he had him there. How did you even get past the perimeter? He asked again because what the hell? How the hell did a toddler get past Hizashi? Hizashi was parked in another van just down the road. Most people wouldn't guess from his whole aesthetic, but Hizashi is scary smart and very good with technology. He had to be in order to record and release his own podcast from his bedroom closet through high school before moving on to managing his own radio show. That is why, as they speak, Hizashi was piloting a drone equipped with a camera to keep an eye on the area and alerting everyone using their comms of anyone going in and out. This, coupled with the other sidekicks Tensei had sent keeping an eye on the perimeter, meant that it would have been tough for even Shoyuta to get in undetected. Have you forgotten my credentials? Midoriya asks Sonoya. Former underground hero. That makes sense. I was taught by the best. Midoriya continues with a teasing lilt to his voice, like he's making a joke. Shoyuta groaned. Whatever. Just get out of here. Or what? Midoriya asked, and there was a challenge there. If he'd managed to sneak past everyone like that, Shoyuta had probably only seen him because he wanted to be seen. What exactly was Shoyuta supposed to do? Shoyuta suddenly grinned as an idea occurred to him. It was enough to make Nemuri take a couple steps back away from him. I will personally make sure you never get your hands on my limited edition shampoo. No! Midoriya cried dramatically. I need it to complete my collection. "'Kay, I'm going. Spoil sport." Shoyuta grinned smugly at the bushes where he saw movement before hanging up. A couple of crows startled, cawing loudly as they left the trees in a flurry of beating wings. Turning back to Rei, he noticed her watching him with an amused twinkle in her eyes. Siblings, she said with a smile, seems they never change. Over her shoulder, Shoyuta could see Nemuri's shoulders shaking in silent laughter as she placed her box into the back of the van before turning back to grab another from the house. Shoyuta nearly choked on his spit. No, we're not. Rei chuckled and shook her head. You don't need to share blood to be family, you know. She gazed at her kids, who were now squabbling over who's sharing a room with who in the safe house they'll be going to. Her eyes went glassy and it seemed she was no longer watching the children but seeing something else. Shoyuta shook his head. His and Midoriya's relationship was strictly professional. Midoriya provided him with information on how to take down villains and in exchange, Shoyuta would help him get what he wanted. He needed to do it because if he didn't, well, Midoriya made the consequences of that pretty clear during their first meeting. Hey, Eraserhead! At the sound of that familiar voice, Shoyuta had the sudden urge to flop bonelessly onto the ground the way he had seen some cats do when their owners tried to take them on walks. Unfortunately, Shoyuta was an adult human and needed to act professionally, so he settled for turning to glare at the thorn in his side. Shoyuta had mostly managed to avoid Ms. Joke so far today, but it seemed his luck had run. He turned to watch as she jogged towards them with a large cardboard box in her arms. She quickly approached the van, setting it down with a quiet thump. Shoyuta watched, impressed as the whole van shifted under the weight of the box. If it weren't for Ms. Joke using her quirk on him once, Shoyuta would think she had a strength enhancement quirk. But no. Her quirk and general personality just meant that she had phenomenal core strength from laughing all the time. Shoyuta thought back to the days of pain every time he moved after Ms. Joke used her quirk on him. He shuddered. What do you want, Ms. Joke? Shoyuta crossed his arms and leaned back in order to appear bored. When Ms. Joke turned to him, he felt a thrill of dread run up his spine. There was a certain sparkle in her eyes that Shoyuta was rather familiar with, one that came with a promise of mischief. You're the one in charge of the investigation, so I was told I'd need your permission for a little side quest. Ms. Joke was smiling, but it wasn't a nice, friendly kind of smile. Shoyuta was intrigued. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of side quest? Ms. Joke waved her hands about. Oh, hiding all the light bulbs in the house. And moving all the furniture 5 centimeters to the left. And stealing all of that asshole's Tuesday tighty witties. Shoyuta thought about it for a while. Does Todoroki even wear his underwear of the week on the right days? Sue him, he was curious. They both turned to Rei, who was looking at Ms. Joke, her eyes wide and glassy and a flush high on her cheeks. Shoyuta mentally raised his eyebrows. This was the most he had ever seen Rei really emote in the months he had known her. Yes. Rei blinked, her eyes clearing a little, the dazed look on her face receding a bit. He does. And then she smiled, shy and closed-lipped at Ms. Joke. Ms. Joke clapped her hands together, her returning smile almost blinding in its intensity before turning to Shoyuta with puppy dog eyes. Shoyuta turned this new information over in his head. Legally, no, I cannot give you permission to do all of that. Shoyuta watched Ms. Joke's face fall and had to resist the urge to let loose his signature sadistic grin. However, I think the legal system would let such things slide if it were the family to, say, hide all the light bulbs in the house, and move all furniture 5 centimeters to the left and steal Todoroki's Tuesday tidy witties. He could no longer resist, he bared his teeth in a feral grin. And of course, as heroes, it is our job to help out people in need. Ms. Joke let out a loud whoop before turning to Rei. The two began to talk in hushed whispers and Shoyuta left them to it. As the two made their way back inside, Nemuri raised her eyebrows at them before turning to Shoyuta and wiggling her eyebrows. Shoyuta looked back towards the estate, but the two had already disappeared. Yeah, he could see it. While Ms. Joke and Rei were hard at work on their little side quest, the kids had also gotten involved in their own way. The kids wanted nothing more than burn the whole estate down and dance over the ashes, but Shoyuta quickly talked them out of that idea. Aggravated arson wouldn't look good in court after all. Still, they wanted to help, so Shoyuta had no choice really, but to give them ideas on how to channel their anger effectively. And that's how all 4 children ended up marching out of the house, arms laden with rolls of toilet paper, while little Shudo resolutely clutched 2 rolls of paper towel, one under each arm. When Rei caught sight of her children, she froze for a split second as she simply processed what they were doing. And then she was letting out peals of laughter that echoed around the clearing in front of the house. She laughed so hard that she needed to put a hand on the side of the van to support herself. The kids all looked on in wonder as they watched their mother laugh, truly laugh, possibly for the first time in their lives. Then they joined in, the younger children releasing high-pitched giggles while Tuya guffawed, nearly dropping the packet of toilet paper he was clutching to his chest for dear life. Nemuri and the sidekick guarding the van added their own chuckles and snorts, though Ms. Joke was by far the most obnoxious of them all with her full belly laughs. Shoyuta ducked his head to hide his smile. It took a while, but they all managed to calm themselves, and then they were rushing to finish packing the van. While the four children loaded all of the toilet paper from the house into the back of the van, Tuya had smirked before showing Shoyuta the little bottle of black nail polish he held. The genius had painted a bunch of thumbtacks black so they were harder to spot once they had been placed on Todoroki's black leather office chair, point up. Shoyuta sent him his patented Totoro grin or approval, making Tuya flush with pride. The toilet paper had been stolen, thumbtacks left on Endeavor's desk chair, light bulbs hidden in a box tucked away on a shelf in the laundry that Endeavor didn't use, the furniture had all been moved 5 centimeters to the left, and 3 pairs of tidy-whities had been put in a plastic bag that hung off of Ms. Joke's belt. Shoyuta cringed when he heard her wondering how much authentic used Endeavor underwear would go for on eBay. Shoyuta was proud of the family. He made sure to tell Rei this as he helped her pack the last few things into the van. Just as they finished, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. "Meet me at our usual place." "Who ya texting?" Ms. Joke asked, trying to look over his shoulder. Shoyuta moved so his back was to her. "My informant is requesting a meeting, but he can wait." Ms. Joke waved him off. "No go, don't worry about us, I'll drive them to the safe house. I can take the first guard shift too." Rei perked up at this from where she was helping the kids get buckled in. Shoyuta resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Fine." He walked down the road to tell Hizashi about the change of plans and tell him what he was doing, sharing a quick kiss before starting to make his way towards the park, the 2 vans passing him before they split up at the intersection to head to their separate destinations. It didn't take Shoyuta long to get to the park. It took him even less time to spot the kid sitting alone on the park bench and sit down beside him with a sigh. "So, how'd it go?" Midoriya asked. He was playing with a piece of thread that had come off of the sleeve of his dark hoodie. Upon closer inspection, Shoyuta saw that it was a gang orca hoodie, while looking up at Shoyuta. "Hello to you too, brat," Shoyuta internally snarked, though there was little actual heat in it. It went well. The family should be at the safe house right now, as long as Ms. Joke didn't crash. Midoriya turned to him with a smile. "Oh." Shoyuta narrowed his eyes at him. "What?" Midoriya wiggled his eyebrows. "Ms. Joke staying the night, huh?" Shoyuta couldn't help the grin that spread across his face when he thought back to the way Joke had so readily volunteered her time. Of course Midoriya would know something about this, or at least be able to guess. Midoriya had a wicked smile on his face. "I was watching for a while before you spotted me." Ms. Joke and Rei-chan were acting quite cozy. Now, one of the uninitiated may think that as a stoic pro-hero, Shoyuta would have no interest in gossip. They would of course be dead wrong. It was an open secret that underground heroes were some of the worst gossips, second only to the press. Shoyuta let his grin sharpen at the edges. You should have seen the way Rei looked at her when Joke said she wanted to hide all the light bulbs in the house and steal all of Todoroki's Tuesday tighty-whities. Midoriya cackled like a deranged hyena. "Oh, that would do it." Shoyuta huffed before narrowing his eyes. "But you knew something like this was going to happen when I first told you Ms. Joke was going to be there, didn't you?" Midoriya imitated his smile with scary accuracy. Seriously, if it weren't for the fact that he knew better, he might wonder if they were somehow related, and leaned forward, fingers steepled and eyes shining with the promise of good gossip. "I was in that mental hospital with Rei for years and we got along quite well. We were besties, you see, so I know quite a lot about her. Like how she mains Toad on Mario Kart and how she likes her coffee, but I also happen to learn her type, a flash of teeth. Above all, Rei loves someone who can make her laugh, and let's not forget how much Ms. Joke loves kids and making people laugh." He paused, turned to Shoyuta with a thoughtful smile. "Well, I won't be surprised if they end up together. The real question is, who will get you as their best man?" Shoyuta grinned as he tucked that little bit of blackmail material away for later. "On the bright side, I bet they'll both be willing to return the favor on your big day." Shoyuta inhaled sharply before coughing when he choked on his own spit. His face warmed as blood rushed to his head, definitely because he was coughing and for no other reason. But when he looked at Midoriya, he was smiling at him smugly. He saw right through him. Shoyuta coughed one last time to clear his throat before trying to regain some type of control over the conversation. You say that as if you're not going to be the flower boy at my wedding. Now it was Midoriya's turn to suffer. Flower boy? He squeaked out. Shoyuta raised an eyebrow. He was enjoying this way too much. Yeah, why not? Midoriya sputtered. Because, my mom. Shoyuta suddenly sat up. That reminds me, he turned to face Midoriya fully. You're legally a minor, so if I'm going to be opening an investigation into your school, I'll need to talk to your mother about your part in the investigation. Midoriya opened his mouth to argue but closed it when he saw the expression on Shuta's face. Shoyuta could see the fading bruise on the side of his head and the fresher one on his arm that peeked out from where he had pushed up the sleeves on his hoodie to his elbows. He wouldn't drop this. Finally, Midoriya let out a sigh. Mom isn't going to like this. But at least it could give me a semi-legitimate excuse to talk to you so I don't have to sneak around all the time. Shoyuta didn't think of that. That would definitely make things easier in the long run. One more thing, Midoriya said, interrupting Shuta's thoughts. Shoyuta raised his eyebrows to show that he was listening. Midoriya sighed. We're going to have to be careful about this investigation. We'll probably only be able to actually do anything about these schools after I've left or when I'm on my way out to minimize the ripple effect this will have on this timeline. This has never happened before, so I won't be able to track the changes like most other stuff. Shoyuta didn't like the sound of this. What do you mean by ripple effect? You've heard of the butterfly effect, right? The idea that a butterfly will flap its wings on one side of the world and cause a hurricane on the other? Well, sometimes things happen and change and I'm not in the right place at the right time and people die. Midoriya's expression shifted to become rigid. He was looking at Shoyuta, but it was obvious he wasn't seeing Shoyuta. Shoyuta swallowed. He knew what Midoriya was feeling all too well. Okay, Shoyuta nodded. We won't do anything about your school until you're gone. At least this will mean we'll have more time to gather evidence. Midoriya sent him a quick smile of thanks. With that sorted, Shoyuta quickly stood in one smooth motion while Midoriya was left to awkwardly climb off of the bench. As Shoyuta watched, he couldn't help but wonder once again just how he had snuck onto the Todoroki estate without anyone noticing. Midoriya stumbled as he got to the ground before straightening up. Okay, follow me then, and he began to lead the way out of the. As they passed a group of crows sitting around a rubbish bin, Midoriya stopped to smile and wave at them. One of the crows sitting on the lip of the bin looked up at Midoriya, staring at him for a few seconds with its little beady eyes before letting out a low caw. Satisfied, Midoriya continued walking. Shoyuta raised his eyebrows before shaking his head. Weird, but not the weirdest thing Shoyuta had seen the kid do. Small Fast watched as Dark Tall and his nice little left the park. When Leader Friend told Small Fast to follow Dark Tall, Leader Friend hadn't told Small Fast that Dark Tall had a nestling. And it was a nestling, it would be a few more years before Nice Little would be a fledgling. Leader Friend will want to know Dark Tall has a nestling. But Small Fast will have to wait. Small Fast has a job to do. Small Fast shook out Small Fast's wings and launched Small Fast off of the food bin to follow Dark Tall and Nice Little. Midoriya Inko loved her son. She loved him even when he gave her a heart attack by inviting a strange man into their apartment. Inko has never seen this man in her life, but when she sees him she has to pause as her mind's eye conjures up an image of the same man but older, more tired and with a jagged scar under his right eye. She shook her head to dispel the image as she let her quirk flow to pool in her hands, ready to attack if this man stepped out of line. Izuku had obediently come to stand behind her as she faced down the man. Izuku, her little boy who she would know anywhere. Izuku, who hasn't been the same since that day months ago when he came home from kindergarten. He looks the same and acts the same, but his eyes give it away. They have changed. They no longer shine with the innocence of youth, but instead shimmer with an intelligence beyond his years. The man introduced himself calmly, pulling out his hero license without needing to be prompted. She inspected it, even while knowing full well she wouldn't even know where to start to pick a genuine hero license from a forgery. Eraserhead. She has never heard the name, but she knows it. When she looks at the katakana of his hero name, she does not see the perfect printed characters but the same katakana written in her son's sloppy handwriting at the top of a lined page in a notebook. Under it is a description of the man's quirk and a breakdown of his fighting style. She handed the license back to the man, Eraserhead, who quickly put it away while telling her that they needed to talk. She blinks and on the back of her eyelids is an image of the man before her staring her down with his single remaining eye so full of sadness and regret. She blinks again but the image has faded. When she asked what this was about, her anxiety making her thoughts race through, what if? It is not Eraserhead who answered, but Izuku. The teachers at school are meanies so I told a hero, because that's what you're supposed to do when people are being mean. Wrong. This is WRNG her son is FOUR no, that's not quite right, he's SIXD no, that's not quite right either. But that's not the point. She knows her son and Izuku doesn't talk like this he is so smart and brave and HESNTSPO can like science to WSAACLD. What do you mean sweetie? How are they being mean? She asked. Eraserhead shifted. We should probably sit down to discuss this. Inko nodded, her brows furrowed in worry. She invited Eraserhead to sit at the dinner table while Inko and Izuku sat on the opposite side. The things that Eraserhead told her made her quirk want to lash out at anything in its path, but it's what Izuku says, her sweet baby he hasn't been a baby in years but he will always be her baby that makes her see red. She will see to it that the people who hurt her baby will face the consequences, if it is the last thing she does. In the week that followed his and Eraserhead's little chat with his mum about the investigation they're opening into the school, Izuku had not known a moment of peace. He loved his mother. Really he did. He had died for her, on multiple occasions, and when he moved out he always came back to visit every Sunday. But the way she constantly hovered over him when he was home now was slowly getting on his nerves. Sometimes, well after his mum had gone to bed and he was left in his room alone with the many All Might action figures and his thoughts, Izuku thought about his quirk. It wouldn't be the first time he thought about it over the years. It was such a strange quirk, a freak mutation of his mother's and father's quirks. So unrelated, in fact, that Izuku sometimes wondered if his father was actually his father. It would make an awful amount of sense. Midoriya Hisashi moved to America before Izuku's quirk manifested, so every time Izuku was sent back to that point, he always came back too late to properly meet him. The only real evidence of Hisashi's existence were the child support payments that appeared in his mum's bank account and, of course, Izuku himself. Not to mention, there was always the chance that Hisashi hadn't actually been born with his quirk, but had gotten it from All for One in exchange for something. This would also make sense, and could explain why Hisashi was never around, too busy following All for One's orders to be with his family. In that case, it could possibly make Izuku a first-generation quirk holder on his father's side, which would explain how different it is. Either way, Hisashi was out of the country and his mother refused to talk about him, even on her deathbed all those loops ago, when cancer had taken her. And it wasn't like he was just going to ask her to her face. Even when he had gone through his little villain phase, sometimes he wished his quirk didn't give him such a good memory, like when he wanted to forget about certain things he had done on his more questionable loops. He had always respected his mother too much to do that to her. So, there was no way to confirm or deny his hypotheses either way. But sometimes, Izuku wondered if activating his quirk for the first time at the age of 16 had permanently stunted his emotional maturity. Like when his mum helped him set up the tiny microphone and camera setup every morning that allowed Izuku to capture video evidence of the abuse going on at school. It was a fairly simple setup, a small camera and microphone disguised as a pin that was attached to a transceiver the size of a phone battery that was taped just below his armpit. He could set it up himself. He had done something like this probably hundreds of times by now over the years, but his mother still insisted on doing it for him every morning. It was maddening. Every morning he was left silently seething. He knew logically that it wasn't actually his mother that he was really mad at. It was his stupid FNG quirk. Why did his quirk have to send him back to redo all of his schooling over and over again? And why did he have to get quirkless characteristics like the extra toe joint that made finding comfortable shoes such a hassle? Or the organ whose sole purpose was to sometimes explode, causing him to need emergency surgery? Or his wisdom teeth that grew in FNG sideways and required dental surgery every single FING? He managed to live to 18. And on the topic of evolutionary F-ups, why the hell was the male reproductive system designed like that? Two extremely delicate grape-sized organs on the outside of the body? Major design flaw. Especially when little 5-year-olds with god complexes jacked up on red cordial decide to kick him where the sun doesn't shine. Okay, he got a little off track there, but the point still stands. Izuku was suffering through teenager levels of angst when Eraserhead showed up on his doorstep in his civvies completely unannounced that Saturday to take Izuku out for some important business. When Izuku looked back over his shoulder at his mum to see her reaction, he saw she had fetched Izuku's backpack and was smiling at Eraser, and telling them both that she hopes they have fun. Izuku was immediately suspicious. He glared at Eraser when his mum looked away. This was premeditated and Eraser had gone behind his back and somehow got his mum in on it. Eraserhead just smirked back at him, eyebrow raised as if asking what Izuku was going to do about it. BSRD. His mum helped him into his puffer coat and shoes, like he could dress himself, before telling him to be a good boy, pressing his backpack into his hands and then all but drop-kicking him out the front door. Izuku looked back just in time to see his smiling mum close the door in his face with a snap. Izuku stared at the blank expanse of painted wood as if it held all the secrets to the universe. Eraser pointedly cleared his throat after a few seconds and Izuku huffed before following him from the building. The weather was on the cooler side, the first taste of winter hung in the air and tickled the back of Izuku's throat. The trees were all mostly brown, only a few stray green leaves clinging to their lives and branches as their fallen comrades laid below. A couple of birds were out. Quite a few of them had clustered around a woman and a small boy who were sitting on a bench in the park where Izuku usually met up with Eraser. The two were rugged up in coats and beanies as they fed an assortment of sparrows, pigeons and crows. The woman held a small bag of bird feed and allowed her son to reach in to grab a handful of bird food before scattering it at their feet. One of the crows cawed softly before it started pecking at the food, some small bits of bread amongst some sort of seed. Izuku watched them for a few seconds, reminded of how he and his mother would go to the public garden with the huge koi pond and feed the fish. He would have to mention to his mum that he'd like to go back at some point. Two of the crows started to flap their wings before they took off to perch in the trees planted beside the footpath. Izuku watched them with a small smile. When they were a few blocks away from Izuku's apartment, he stopped and turned on Eraser, crossing his arms in front of him. Okay, what the hell is going on? And what on earth are you wearing? Both were valid questions. Eraser was not in his hero costume today, instead wearing his civvies. Izuku looked him up and down. Are you wearing jeggings? He was wearing jeggings. In fact, they looked suspiciously like Best Jeanist but lift jeggings. Highly suspicious. Shut up, they're comfortable, Eraser muttered, absolutely shameless. Besides the jeggings, Eraser was wearing a nice-looking maroon coat, a pair of black and yellow sneakers and his capture weapon which he used to try to hide the bottom half of his face. Unfortunately for Eraser, Izuku's had years to practice reading his face. The fact that Eraser was blushing all the way up to his ears was not exactly helping his case. Neither was the fact Eraser put his hair up in a bun, exposing said ears to the whole world in all their glowing red glory. And I told you before, we're going on important business. Izuku looked Eraser up and down as he tried to figure out what was going on. Eraser is well-dressed. Or at least, relatively well-dressed. He wasn't wearing tracksuit pants or booty shorts, which is always a win in Izuku's book. No one wants to see their former teacher in booty shorts, no matter how many years it's been since he was last taught by Eraser. So he's well-dressed, but he's not in a suit. Thank God, you know things are dire when Eraserhead is wearing a suit. So whatever the two of them are doing right now, it's important to him. Which he did just say, but also 2 words. Logical ruse? Yes, Izuku was still wary of his logical ruses, and for good reason. Turns out that being Eraser's personal student does not give you immunity from the logical ruses, but instead increases your likelihood in encountering one. There are only a few things truly important to Eraserhead. Presently, hero work. His job as a teacher. Izuku can safely cross hero work off of the list of things they could be doing today, since if they were doing that, Eraser would be in his costume. Same with his teaching job, considering he hasn't started that yet. That leaves present Mike, coffee and cats left on the list. Without more information, Izuku isn't really able to make a proper guess, but that doesn't stop him from spending the whole train ride into the city making theories. Is Eraser going to adopt a cat? Is Eraser going to start up a side hustle growing coffee? Is Eraser going undercover to buy a bunch of present Mike merch? Eraser still refused to say anything even when they got off the train. He just grabbed Izuku's hand so they didn't get separated by the crowds and began to drag Izuku along behind him. Izuku tried to ask Eraser where they were going again once they left the train station, but Eraser just sent him an insufferable grin. Izuku would just have to change tactics. So how did you get my mum to agree to this outing? Eraser frowned at that. She's worried about you. She mentioned that you'd been acting off for a while. At this he sent a look at Izuku, who simply pursed his lips. When it was clear that he wasn't going to comment on that, Eraser continued, and she was hoping that getting to hang out with a pro hero would help cheer you up. Izuku smiled at that. Thank any deities that may be listening for his mum, he didn't know what he would do without her. They finally arrived at their destination, bringing Izuku out of his thoughts. They were at a shopping center. Once Izuku registered this, he raised his eyebrows. Why on earth were they at a shopping center? What did Eraser need that he couldn't simply order online? Izuku thought about it for around 2 seconds before the answer came to him, and he had to stop himself from grinning. Unfortunately, when the store came into sight, Izuku couldn't help himself. He squeezed Eraser's hand tight in excitement as a smile broke out across his face. When Eraser looked down and saw Izuku's expression, he rolled his eyes. Of course you figured it out. Why am I not surprised? Izuku just grinned smugly. They walked into the jewelry store and immediately headed for the engagement rings on display. They were the only ones in the store, so when the shopkeeper saw them, she immediately came over. Hello, are you looking for anything in particular, or are you just here to browse? Eraser stiffened minutely beside him, shifting his weight onto his back foot as if he were preparing to bolt. I'm just browsing for now, he said quickly. The woman looked disappointed but headed back towards the register. Izuku raised an eyebrow at Eraser, who grunted. I don't like talking to salespeople. They can smell fear. Izuku had to slap a hand over his mouth to stifle his giggles. Of course, Eraser had no problem taking on hordes of villains with just his capture scarf and a sheet ton of coffee flowing through his veins, but when it came to talking to salespeople, it was just too much. Some things just never change. Eraser glared down at him for a few seconds before closing his eyes and letting out a sigh. So, how do I pick out an engagement ring? Izuku sputtered. Why are you asking me? Sure, Izuku had gotten married before, but he wasn't the one who proposed. His mood soured as he was reminded once again of what he had lost. Eraser frowned. Well, don't you have, experience? Izuku briefly felt like he'd been punched in the gut at the reminder but didn't let it show. Instead, he scoffed in order to cover it up. Are you calling me old? Eraserhead crossed his arms, turning his head to look at a poster on the far wall. Well, aren't you? He was tapping his fingers along his bicep in a random pattern. Eraserhead was nervous. A perfect way to divert the conversation from dangerous territory. Izuku cooed loudly. You're so worked up about this. Eraser's head whipped around to glare at him, his quirk activating. Izuku just laughed. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you. Izuku held up a hand to stop the shopkeeper. Sorry about him, he's a little worked up. Big decision, you know? He smiled one of his charming smiles at her. The woman blinked. Then she blinked again. She looked between Izuku and Eraser, who had managed to turn his quirk off. Well, she started, looking a bit put off. Please refrain from using your quirk in the store, or I will have to ask you to leave. Eraser nodded stiffly, still glaring at Izuku. The woman sent one last look at the two of them before retreating back to the register. Izuku sighed. Look, it's not a bad thing, he started. I think it's actually quite cute that you're getting so worked up over this. Eraser crossed his arms and pouted. I'm not cute. God, why did I even think it would be a good idea to bring you in the first place? Izuku smiled innocently. Because I can definitely pick out a better ring than you? Eraserhead scowled. You don't know that. Actually, Izuku said as he put his hands on his hips, I do. I've seen the ring you choose to propose with and heard the story behind it, and let me tell you, you're lucky Mike loves you so much. Eraserhead opened his mouth before closing it. Fine, he huffed, uncrossing his arms and putting his hands in his pockets. The cheeks were once again flushed with embarrassment. What should I get? Izuku looked over the rings on display. He was a little too short to see the rings on the top shelf of the cabinet, so he had Eraserhead lift him up so he could inspect them all. All in all, there was a pretty good selection. Eraserhead picked a good store. Once Izuku had looked them all over, he stood there, chin in hand as he went over the pros and cons of different rings, narrowing down the list. Izuku knew that Mike didn't really care about the ring itself but more about the message behind it, but Izuku thought that was no excuse not to get a nice ring for him. Once he was done, he'd narrowed down the selection to 3 rings. A gold band with a square-cut emerald flanked by 2 small lab-grown diamonds. Nowhere near the flashiest or most expensive ring on display but still eye-catching. A beautiful gold filigree ring. It's a little more delicate than the other options, but Izuku thinks it would appeal to Mike's more feminine side. Still not the flashiest ring, but it has a certain personality to it. A simple gold band. Like Izuku said before, Mike didn't really care about the ring, but more about the message behind it. Izuku thought that if Eraserhead got the plain band but had something engraved into it that was meaningful to both of them, it would be both pretty and thoughtful. Once he had his list, he turned to Eraserhead, who had been watching him the whole time with an expression torn between awe and fear. Oh, Izuku had been muttering. Dimon, he thought he had killed that habit. Well, Mike should be happy no matter which one you choose, Izuku finished awkwardly. Eraser nodded before turning back to the display. Eraser took his time scrutinizing each ring Izuku had suggested, studying them with such intensity that the shop owner kept sending them uncomfortable looks. Finally, Eraser turned to Izuku. He looked pained. What if I choose the wrong one? Izuku sighed. He couldn't reach his shoulder, so he had to settle for patting his knee. You'll do fine, he'll love it no matter which one you get. But instead of looking reassured, Eraser was frowning. What if he doesn't say yes because I don't propose with the same ring? Izuku quickly shook his head. He loves you, he'll say yes. Despite his reassurances, Eraser was beginning to look panicked. But what about the ripple effect you were talking about last time? The butterfly effect? What if, by not proposing with the ring I did last time, he doesn't say yes? His eyes were wide and he kept wiping the palms of his hands on his jeggings. Eraser was working himself up into quite the tizzy, wasn't he? Izuku sighed before tugging on Eraserhead's coat. Okay, get down here. Looking confused, Eraser complied, kneeling down so he was nearly eye to eye with him. Izuku smiled at him as he reached out to pat him on the cheek. Then he smacked Eraserhead up the head. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough that it shocked him out of his self-deprecating spiral. Then he put both hands on Eraser's cheeks. He squished the man's cheeks together a little for good measure. Are being illogical. Eraser sputtered, trying to get away, but Izuku held on tight, forcing him to stare into his eyes. Yamada Hisashi would walk into hell for you with a smile. He will say yes, no matter what type of ring you use. Eraser was looking at him with so much trepidation and hope that Izuku wanted to wrap the man up in his sleeping bag and maybe sick a cat on him. Boo, how oyao? He asked. Izuku was still squeezing his cheeks, so it came out a bit muffled, but Izuku could still understand him. Izuku scowled. Because when I was interning with you, Mike told me about how you tried to go ring shopping at a proper jewelry store, got frustrated and left to go to the grocery store and buy a ring pop. You proposed to him with a goddamn ring pop and he said yes. Rue a ring po? Eraserhead asked. Izuku squished his cheeks a little more before releasing him. Eraser didn't seem to notice, simply staring past Izuku while wearing a dopey look on his face. eyes wide and suspiciously shiny while his whole face was glowing like a stoplight. Eraser finally managed to snap out of it, quickly getting to his feet once again. Then he called the shopkeeper over. "I'll take that one," he said, pointing at one of the rings Izuku had picked out. When Izuku saw his choice, he smiled. It was a good choice, if he did say so himself. Eraser gave Izuku a small smile as they left the jewelry store behind, the ring box tucked away in a secure pocket for safekeeping. They still ended up going to the grocery store and getting a strawberry ring pop though, just in case. With ring shopping out of the way, they quickly left the busy shopping center for the less crowded streets as they headed back to the train station. Izuku was a little disappointed that their outing was going to be over so soon. Hanging out with Eraserhead was actually kind of fun? Izuku never would have thought he would ever describe hanging out with his former teacher as anything other than nerve-wracking, but he found he was actually enjoying these encounters. At the very least, they were rarely ever boring. And, sure, okay, maybe he did kind of enjoy tormenting Eraserhead. Izuku had spent too much time around Nedzu, his esthis must have rubbed off on him. This was a lie. Izuku had been a sadistic little sheet long before he and Nedzu became besties. After all, it was the real motivator behind their friendship in the first place. "Oi, don't make me carry you," Eraserhead growled. Izuku looked around in surprise. Oh, the train had stopped and Eraser was halfway towards the open door. Izuku quickly got out of his seat and followed Eraserhead from the train. The train station was a little cramped and Eraserhead ended up having to grab his hand again so they didn't get separated by the lunch rush. It was a good thing too, since one particularly harried-looking man covered in muddy-colored scales nearly bowled Izuku over in his rush to grab something to eat and return to the office before his break ended. Both he and Eraser sent glares at the man's retreating back as they continued on their way. The scaled man was promptly forgotten when the two stepped out of the station and Izuku realized they weren't in his neighborhood. He looked around again. Yep, they definitely weren't at his stop. Where? Eraser had the audacity to roll his eyes once he noticed Izuku's reaction. "I'm not taking you home yet," he hesitated, before looking away under the guise of checking for traffic. "I figured you could use the break from being a kid, just for a little while." That was actually kind of thoughtful. Izuku's knee-jerk reaction was to say something sarcastic about Eraserhead actually being nice for once, but for once he was speechless. Eraser very kindly pretended not to notice. They ended up parked on a bench under a tree near a food truck, each of them holding a steaming styrofoam container of takoyaki. The smell of the takoyaki on the breeze took him back to the early mornings in Osaka after a night of bar hopping with his fellow undergrads while he was studying to get his MD. In the early hours of the morning, they'd stuff themselves with enough takoyaki to feed a small army and stumble back to their dormitories to try and get a few hours of sleep before it was time to go back on rotation at the hospital. He smiled at the memory as he dug in. The takoyaki were a little greasier than he would have liked, but they each had the perfect octopus-to-dough ratio which balanced the scales. Izuku was torn between wolfing everything down and savoring every last bite of the delicious street food. Eraser finished quickly and set about fiddling with the now empty container while he waited for Izuku to finish his own. Izuku, however, had other plans. He gently nudged Eraser towards the food truck. "You should get seconds. You're too skinny." Eraser sent him a sardonic look. "You're one to talk. If I'm getting seconds, then you're having some too, so you can grow big and strong like me." Izuku glared daggers at Eraser, convinced that he somehow knew he had inherited his mother's height, or lack thereof. No, Izuku was not insecure about his height. The 6-inch platform boots that were part of Izuku's villain costume can burn in fashion hell where they belong, right next to Best Jeanist's name brand underwear line. Okay, maybe that's another lie. Maybe Izuku did miss his big stompy boots, but Izuku would never admit it. Respect your elders, Izuku enunciated each word clearly in English because there were children around and Izuku was not going to be a bad influence on poor innocent children. Eraserhead, on the other hand, was a grown man, sort of, and should know better than to let Izuku get him involved in any shenanigans. Eraser scoffed but got up to get himself seconds. If Izuku ended up stealing 1 or 2, then what did you expect? He used to be the world's most feared villain. He wasn't scared to commit grand theft takoyaki under the nose of a hero. What was Eraser gonna do? Arrest him? Even though he had the lower half of his face hidden by his capture scarf, Izuku could still see Eraser smile as he stuffed his cheeks with the stolen food. Izuku scowled as he chewed, just to be contrary. They sat there on the park bench for a while, just enjoying the day. The sun had come out and was shining down, bathing them both in warm golden light. Izuku even ended up needing to unzip the ridiculous coat his mother had put him in earlier that morning. Both he and Eraser watched as a couple of birds fought over some abandoned takoyaki near the bins before two big crows touched down and hogged the tray to themselves. It was nice. We should hang out more often. Eraser made an exaggerated noise of disgust which only made Izuku double down. Come on. If I can't be normal around just one person, I'll actually go insane. I'm pretty sure that ship's already sailed, Eraserhead muttered as he packed up their little styrofoam containers to throw in the bin. Izuku pretended to be hurt by his words. Just because you're right doesn't mean you should say it. Come on, I can give you info. Eraserhead crossed his arms. What sort of info? Izuku put on a coy smile. You have a weak secondary telekinesis quirk that you can control with practice. Eraserhead looked appropriately gobsmacked. What? Telling people things they'd assumed all of their life as fact were actually not true was something that never got old. Yeah, since the erasure aspect is so prominent, I bet you never really tried to HRNSS the part of your quirk that allows your hair to stay out of your eyes. You also subconsciously use it on your capture weapon. Eraserhead put his hand up. Wait, really? Izuku nodded. Your capture weapon is actually the thing that started this whole thing. So, when I was at UA, you took this kid under your wing and trained him so he had a better chance at getting in the hero course, and you thought it would be a good idea to teach him to use your capture weapon, except that no matter how much he practiced, he couldn't get it to move like you do. Of course, this was fixed by the support department making a few tweaks to the original design. They chose a lighter alloy that doesn't compromise on strength and durability and fitted it out with some cool snaps woven into several different points so it gripped things better. But the point is, you have minor telekinesis. Eraserhead was staring at his hands looking like he didn't know which way was up, but Izuku was on a tangent and wouldn't let little things like other people's existential crises stop him. It's because of this that I was ambushed by one of my dear friends, and asked if you were secretly my uncle cause my mum's quirk is attraction of small objects, and since your telekinesis only works on light objects, they look pretty similar except my mum's quirk isn't actually telekinesis, but a form of gravity manipulation that allows her to pull small objects towards her. Of course, with training, her quirk could be so powerful, she could bring down buildings or make objects orbit her to gain speed before releasing them like bullets. If she studied the human body, she could potentially use her quirk to seriously maim or even kill someone. That's what I told this friend, but he simply wasn't convinced. This is the same person who asked me whether I am All Might's secret love child and even your secret love child on two separate occasions though. Obviously both theories are flawed since A, both you and All Might would never be with a woman romantically, and B, neither All Might nor my mother are pedophiles. Like, can you imagine? That's so gross. Izuku was cut off when a hand was placed over his mouth. Izuku was startled out of his thoughts, and upon realizing there was a hand over his mouth, his body reacted like that of a seasoned pro hero who had been kidnapped a few too many times. Izuku bit down. Eraser swore loudly as he yanked his hand back and cradled it to his chest while giving Izuku a dirty look. I'm so sorry. Izuku cried. Two mothers were glaring at the two, one looking 2 seconds away from calling the cops on Eraser while the other one was trying to shoo their kids away from them. Eraserhead just grunted as he grabbed a handful of capture weapon to press against the bite. A sizable red stain began to bleed through the off-white material. Izuku had really chomped down hard, and Eraser's hand was bleeding quite a bit. Izuku reached back into his backpack for the first aid kit he had hidden inside. I am so sorry. Here, let me fix that up, Izuku offered. Eraser opened his mouth to protest but seemed to think better of it at the last second. Instead he let out a long-suffering sigh and silently offered up his hand. Izuku pulled the now bloody capture weapon away from the bite. Pulling out a small bottle of saline solution, Izuku rinsed out the wound before covering it with some fresh gauze and applying pressure to try to stop the bleeding. I really am sorry. I know I can't die, but that doesn't mean I can't be kidnapped and, well. Izuku trailed off. Be experimented on. Or sold by human traffickers. Or have a certain sick bird mask-wearing Yakuza see him dry of blood again and again in the hopes it will let him return the world back to a pre-quirk state. Izuku was uniquely qualified in saying that there were many things worse than death out in the world that he would very much like to avoid. I hope it doesn't scar. Eraserhead closed his eyes and let out a quiet hiss as Izuku wrapped his hand with a bandage. It's okay, kid. You have no idea how many times I've accidentally flipped out on someone for just touching me. Next time I'll just shake you until I can get your attention. Izuku was glad Eraser didn't seem too sad by the bite. That still didn't stop him from messing with Eraser a little bit more. He smiled coyly. Didn't your parenting classes teach you not to shake the baby? Eraserhead's eyes shot wide open. Parenting classes? Izuku sent him an impish grin. Izuku wondered if this was how Nedzu felt all the time, knowing that people know you know things you shouldn't but do anyways. Eraserhead was looking panicked. I'm not ready to be a father. If it weren't for Hizashi, I would have accidentally killed myself years ago. I can't look after a kid. Izuku gently placed his hand on the finished neat bandages. Don't worry, you won't have to worry about that for a few more years yet. Eraserhead still looked kind of pale though, so Izuku changed the subject as he packed his supplies back away. You'd probably be safer buying a Nerf gun or something and just shooting me when I get carried away. Eraserhead pressed his lips together like he was trying to repress a smile. Would one of those spray bottles filled with water work? Izuku paused in what he was doing to look him dead in the eye. I will leave you in a ditch if you spray me with a water bottle like a misbehaving cat. Eraser laughed nervously, looking like he was considering the odds of who would win if it came down to a fight between the two of them and realizing that his victory wasn't a certainty. Now they were alone, Izuku could actually get down to business. So how is the family? Eraser looked like he was glad for the subject change. They're great. Rei is looking into changing their family name. She doesn't want to go back to being a Himura. Yeah, Rei may have mentioned how she didn't want to be reminded of the family that sold her to the highest bidder once or twice. Emi says she's looking into taking a new name entirely. I told her that she should suggest that Rei wait until she can take Fukukado as her family name. Izuku chuckled. What did she say? Eraser did his best turtle impression, retracting his face into his capture weapon. Izuku pictured Eraser's neck disappearing back into his body like that one girl from Shiketsu and shook his head to try to get rid of that cursed image. Come on, it can't be that bad. Eraser gave a gusty sigh. Bold words from someone I once caught mashing his crush's name with his own to create a ship name. A red flush spread from the tops of Eraser's cheeks up to his ears and disappeared below his capture weapon. Izuku cackled, sounding a little deranged as he folded like a wet paper towel to bang his knee with his fist. He wiped his eyes to catch the tears trying to escape. Young love, isn't it just wonderful? Eraser growled. Shut up, old man. Izuku perked up at the affectionate nickname insult. Eraser continued. The kids seem to be settling in well too, and they're all in therapy, though I heard Tuya was a little hesitant at first. I went to visit them a few days ago. It's like looking at a totally different family. Fiddled with the bloody end of his scarf. They're not all the way there yet, but in just a few days they were already so much happier. Izuku smiled softly. He wished he could have seen them, but he had known for a while that that simply would not be possible. It was probably better, anyways. So, we got the family out. Dumb and Dumber arrested that quirk specialist you mentioned and are looking for Tenko, which, I'm not even going to ask how they convinced God the Dmed Mighty Agency to help out with that. I do not want to know, and we're going to destroy your school district. Any other diabolical plans I should know about? Izuku stroked his chin as he mentally scrolled through his seemingly ever-expanding bucket list. He'd started mentally referring to it as that since list of things I need to do to leave the world a better place once Eraser finally kills me was a little too much of a mouthful even for him. Well, I'd like to stop a few serial killers and mass murderers before they, start murdering people. Would you be able to get me in touch with some support techies? Eraser raised his eyebrows. I kind of figured you could find one yourself easily. Izuku crossed his arms. My favorite support techie is busy right now learning how to write her name in kanji and tie her shoelaces. Eraser was visibly thrown for a few seconds, blinking rapidly a couple of times before managing to recover. What do you need? Izuku unzipped his backpack and reached inside for a notebook and a pen. He ended up finding his hero's signature notebook and a few snacks in his backpack. His mum had made sure he was well prepared for his outing. He flipped to a clean page before beginning to sketch something out. He'd been thinking about this for a while now. I need one of these. Based on the Shai Hisakai's guns, it was a small handgun that used compressed air to shoot small needle-tipped canisters of Izuku's chosen toxin into the target. It would be small, and was designed to minimize the recoil so someone, say, Izuku's height and weight could use it without hurting themselves. What are you going to put in the canisters? Eraser asked as he inspected the diagram. Izuku bit his lip. That's still a bit of a work in progress. Unfortunately, I simply don't have access to a lot of resources, so it depends on what I can get my hands on. I'd prefer some sort of tranquilizer or temporary paralytic, but some of the targets I have in mind, well, something a little more lethal would also do the job. Eraser pinched the bridge of his nose. I am going to pretend I did not just hear you say that. He glared at Izuku. I can get you this, but you absolutely cannot use it to murder people. Izuku pouted. Not even if some of them deserve it? Eraser glared harder. Yes, even if they deserve it. And you can only use it with my supervision. Izuku rolled his eyes. Okay, Dad, whatever you say. It would probably be for the best anyways if. Eraser was the one to look after it. Izuku wasn't sure how he'd explain a functional gun if his mum found it while cleaning his room. Eraser scoffed and shook his head. You're unbelievable. Izuku felt like he needed to tell Eraser something important related to the gun, but he couldn't remember what it was. After a few seconds of racking his brain, he gave up. Whatever, surely it couldn't be that important if he forgot. By the time they finished hashing out the details, it was getting on in the day and Eraser needed to run a few errands. He dropped Izuku off back at his place with a ruffle of his hair and a promise to talk soon. Izuku was feeling much more refreshed after his outing, and didn't even scowl when his mum bundled him up in a hug before he even had a chance to step inside. All he did was hug her back tightly. A crow perched in a nearby tree and cooed loudly at the scene, making Izuku turn to look. He stared at it for 3 whole seconds before cursing under his breath. God damn it, he knew he forgot to tell Eraser something important. Hey babe. Hisashi called as he stepped through the front door. He quickly shed his jacket and boots before he ventured further into the apartment, head turning this way and that as he looked around for any sign of Shoyuta. Shoyuta had to hold back a smile when Hisashi audibly gasped at the scene waiting for him in their kitchen. Shoyuta had gone all out, stopping by the grocery store on the way home after he dropped the brat off and grabbing what he needed before quickly making his way home to prepare for Hisashi's arrival. The entire kitchen was softly lit by candlelight, 36 candles in total, some tea lights and some small pillar candles, all non-scented because Hisashi has allergies, and Shoyuta had even dug out an old fancy tablecloth from the linen closet to throw over their shitty laminated dinner table. The whole room smelled of the homemade fried chicken and fries being kept warm in the oven, and a packet of store-bought tiramisu-flavored daifuku sat in the freezer for later. Shoyuta had gone all out in making sure their diner would be full of Hisashi's favorites. Everything was perfect. This proposal would be one they would both remember, for better or for worse. Except, as soon as he heard the keys in the door, Shuta's mouth had dried up in an instant and his heart had decided that it would be fun to throw itself against his sternum with every contraction. Hisashi slowly took everything in with wide eyes before turning to Shoyuta, his face looking almost flushed in the dim light. Shoyuta mostly avoided eye contact with people, but at that moment he was having a hard time tearing his eyes away from Hisashi's. This man was beautiful. Just imagining being able to call him his husband made him feel a little dizzy. What's going on? Hisashi asked slowly. Shoyuta opened his mouth to reply, but his tongue felt like it was too heavy in his mouth, too clumsy to form proper words. he pushed on. Anyway, he cleared his throat. Dinner. Tonight. He internally cringed. God, Shoyuta was a mess. He was just asking his wonderful and lovely and amazing boyfriend way out of his league to marry him. What could go wrong? He could reject you. He could say no. He could laugh in your face and… Even the infuriating quasi-immortal toddler, old man, said that Hizashi loved him. And they were married in the future. So Hizashi must have said yes at some point. He needed to pull himself together. It would be fine. He just had to ask when the time was right. He pulled a chair out for Hizashi, gesturing for him to sit down. Hizashi watched his every move as he gingerly sat down on the edge of the chair. Shoyuta pushed it in and got to work on serving everything up. What happened to your hand, babe? Hizashi asked. Shuta's throat mercifully loosened enough for him to answer the question. The kid bit me, it's nothing. He poured 2 glasses of water and sat them both down on the table. Hizashi grabbed his wrist before he could head back to the kitchen and gently inspected his bandaged hand. Babe, he pouted up at Shoyuta, do you want me to kiss it better? Shuta's face ignited with a cherry red blush as his stutter returned with a vengeance. God, why did Hizashi have to make this so hard? Food. He cried out desperately before hightailing back to the kitchen. He took a second to try to collect himself before grabbing the 2 plates. Once he had set them both down at the table, he sat down across from Hizashi. Itadakimasu. This looks great show. Hizashi told him enthusiastically, smile slightly crooked the way that made butterflies take flight in Shuta's stomach. Shoyuta tried to return the gesture, but it came out as more of a grimace. He quickly put a piece of fried chicken in his mouth to try to make the situation less awkward. The chicken was juicy and tender, cooked to perfection because Hizashi deserved the best. Shoyuta could barely taste it as he chewed before swallowing. His throat was dry, so when he swallowed, the chicken got caught in his throat. He quickly took a sip of his water to help wash it down. Hizashi also tucked in, making sure to voice his appreciation, but Shoyuta couldn't find the words to respond as he usually would, simply remaining silent. Hizashi's smile became more strained with every remark he made that was met with silence. Sue! It threw Shoyuta off to hear his boyfriend sound so unsure of himself. Before he could think much of it though, Hizashi continued. You were hanging out with the little listener today, right? How is he? Oh no, Shuta's nervousness had made Hizashi nervous and had reverted back to his present Mike persona. This wasn't the plan. We got lunch, he managed to get out. His whole body was suddenly achingly aware of the ring box tucked into the small of his back. Hizashi nodded hesitantly, looking away from Shoyuta and using his chopsticks to push a bit of fried chicken around his plate. Oh, what did you get? Shoyuta couldn't do this. I can't do this. What? Hizashi was watching him with wide, suspiciously glassy eyes. What, Shoyuta, what? Shoyuta quickly got out of his seat. Hizashi also rose from his seat, looking increasingly panicked. Then, Shoyuta dropped to one knee hard enough for it to crack loudly against the floor, but the adrenaline coursing through his system didn't allow him to feel any pain. Hizashi, I love you so much, Hizashi, and… His throat was trying to close up, but Shoyuta had to say this. I want to be with you for the rest of my life. I want you to be my husband. Hizashi opened his mouth, throat flexing in that way that meant his quirk was engaged, and Shoyuta reflexively erased it before Hizashi could accidentally shatter all of the glass in a 15-meter radius with his scream. It made something in Shuta's chest squirm happily, knowing that he was able to do so without a thought because of all of the years they had spent together. Even without his quirk, Hizashi was still loud. Yes. God. He dropped to his knees in front of Shoyuta and pulled him against his chest. I was so worried you were about to break up with me. Shoyuta sputtered, the sudden shift making it easier for him to talk. What? You thought I made your favorite meal and set all of these candles just to break up with you? Well, I don't know. You were acting weird and it made me nervous, but oh my god, you're gonna be my husband? I'm gonna be a husband? Hizashi blinked, letting his tears fall down his face even as he grinned ear to ear. Then he was suddenly kissing Shoyuta, leaving small kisses all over his face. God, I love you so much, he pulled back to rest their foreheads against each other. My lovable dork of a husband. Shuda's whole face felt too hot and his cheeks hurt from how widely he was smiling. Husband, he repeated the word breathily, like he hadn't been whispering the word under his breath the entire time he had been preparing their dinner. God, I can't wait to introduce you to everyone as my husband. Hisashi mirrored his grin. Sorry guys, but I have to leave early tonight. My husband is waiting for me at home. Oh God, can you imagine? Shuda's whole body sagged against Hisashi. I am so glad that you said yes. I was nearly pulling my hair out all day, he admitted. Hisashi pulled away as he cooed. Ah, baby, that's so sweet. I love you so much, you know? Shoyuta reached out to grab one of Hisashi's hands. He laced their fingers together before giving him a gentle squeeze. Hisashi squeezed back. I can't wait to put a ring on it. He traced his thumb over Shuda's ring finger, making him tense. Oh shit, Shoyuta whispered. He had gone through all the trouble of going ring shopping just to forget about them in the heat of the moment. He couldn't believe it. He quickly pulled his hand from Hisashi's to reach for the rings. When he pulled them from their hiding place, he all but threw them at Hisashi. Hisashi giggled, smiling at Shoyuta with so much love and no small amount of amusement. You bought dash, he started before cutting himself off with a bark of laughter. A ring pop? Oh babe. He pulled Shoyuta in for another kiss, hot and heavy. Shoyuta allowed himself to enjoy the kiss for a few seconds before pulling away. Yes, but I also got this. He once again grabbed the small velvet-lined box and opened it, letting Hisashi see inside. In the end he bought Hisashi the filigree ring. At the base of the ring there was a small stretch of solid band, and on the inside of that band Shoyuta had gotten the date of the first real date they went on engraved. It was also the date of their first kiss. When Hisashi noticed that small detail he teared up. Oh God? Shoyuta? I love it. I love you so much. Shoyuta pulled Hisashi into his arms as his boyfriend-fiancé cried happy tears. As he held the man he loved and wanted to spend the rest of his life with close, Shoyuta couldn't help but feel he was the luckiest man on earth. Shoyuta had been on cloud 9. His amazing, awesome, way out of his league boyfriend had agreed to marry him, and the irritating and bitey cryptid called Midoriya hadn't said anything to turn Shuda's whole world on its head in a whole week. Hell, Shuda's patrol last night had been quiet and hadn't run into overtime, so he'd even been able to get a decent amount of sleep. So to say that things were definitely looking up for him was a huge understatement. Unfortunately, all good things had to come to an end. Shoyuta had known this, had known that something would come along and ruin his mood. In fact, he had been waiting for it to happen. He just never expected, well, a visit to the hospital, sure. He could deal with that. It was an occupational hazard. His favorite flavor of jelly pouch being discontinued? Sad, but he'd get over it. Being followed on the street in the middle of the day, though? Infuriating. He wasn't sure what annoyed him the most. The fact that someone was following him in broad daylight when he was off the clock, or the fact that they were following him in the middle of the day and he couldn't figure out who it was. The life of an underground hero was a hard and dangerous one. They were the ones to take on the neighborhoods that had been neglected by the spotlight heroes, during the smallest hours of the night when the heroes on the street were few and far between and backup simply wasn't an option. Underground heroes had to adapt, learn to pick their fights, and to trust their instincts. Right now, Shuda's instincts were telling him that he was being watched. It was nearly 3 p.m., the pale light of the late autumn sun not doing much to warm anything up. Shoyuta was bundled in a warm jacket, capture scarf, and fingerless gloves as he headed to the store for snacks and drinks. He and Zashi were spending the night in, and Zashi had been the one to send him out since. Can't have a movie night without snacks? Come on, show. The streets weren't particularly packed, nor were they deserted, though with the end of the school day approaching that would quickly change. Shoyuta once again looked around for the source of the unpleasant prickling at the back of his neck. No one stood out to him at first glance. A couple of street vendors were set up along the footpath, colorful carts backing up to the road. A group of Western tourists gawking at a statue. A lone woman reading a magazine seated out front of a cafe. His eyes caught on a pack of tracksuit yakuza bickering outside of a small vendor, but he quickly dismissed them. They were far too busy posturing to notice or care about the off-duty underground hero strolling right past them. Shoyuta kept his expression blank as he reached the pedestrian crossing and instead of crossing straight ahead to get to the store on the other corner, turned right and continued down the block. The feeling of being watched persisted. He turned right again, then again, and when the feeling didn't dissipate, he ducked into an alley. A full 3 minutes after entering the alleyway, cautious footsteps entered after him. Shoyuta didn't hesitate. He ambushed the person from his hasty perch on a second-story fire escape. His capture weapon flew out, heading straight and true for the silhouette at the entrance to the alleyway, only to be intercepted by a dark blur flying through the air. His capture weapon wrapped around the blur, halting it in midair for a moment before the capture weapon contracted back towards him. The blur gave a strangled-sounding noise, giving Shuta's position away. The person looked up and met Shuta's eyes. It was the woman who had been sitting in front of the cafe. She was in her 30s and wore a pair of slip-on sneakers, comfortable-looking tracksuit pants, and a cozy pale yellow crochet cardigan. 2 horns poked out of her hair, though on closer inspection it almost appeared more like sheep fleece than human hair. Her face was slightly rocky, her mouth a wide, crooked line. She also held a taser in her hand and was pointing it straight at Shuta's chest. "Erase her head, release my bird now." Shoyuta glanced between the taser and the thing writhing in his capture weapon. Upon further inspection, the thing turned out to be a rather large crow. Shoyuta loosened the capture weapon enough that it wouldn't hurt the bird before turning back to the woman aiming a weapon at him. "I don't think I will, not until you tell me who you are and what you want." The woman narrowed her eyes. "A fall from that height would be quite painful. I suggest you rethink your decision." Shoyuta sent another wary look at the taser. She was right. Falling from where he was perched could result in severe injuries, and he very much liked being able to walk without the need of a cane or crutches. He very reluctantly released the crow from his capture weapon and watched as it flew down to land on the woman's shoulder. A second later, another smaller crow flew down from where it had been perched on the edge of the roof out of Shuta's line of sight, looking down at the scene to sit on the woman's free shoulder. The woman slowly lowered her taser, her eyes never leaving Shoyuta. A wise choice. She sniffed and sent a distasteful look around the alleyway. "Now, with that out of the way, would you mind coming down so we can have a proper discussion?" Shoyuta didn't budge. "Give me a single good reason not to arrest you right now." The woman gave Shoyuta a flat look. "I'm going to reach into my back pocket to retrieve my credentials now, and so help me if you try to wrap me up with that scarf of yours, I will make you regret it." She did as she said she would, reaching into the back pocket of her jeans and pulling out a wallet. She threw the wallet up to Shoyuta with an underarm throw. Shoyuta snatched it from the air and sent one last suspicious look at the woman before he flipped it open. Inside was a PI license with a photo of the woman on it. Shoyuta read over the information listed on the card. The woman's name was Kuda Hina, she was 32 and her quirk was listed as Animal Voice. Behind the PI license was a quirk usage permit. Shoyuta inspected both, double and triple checking their authenticity, and okay, maybe he was doing it just to make it clear exactly how much he wasn't a fan of the whole situation. When he was satisfied everything was legitimate, he flipped the wallet closed and threw it back down. He was just a tad disgruntled when she caught it without blinking. "Why were you following me?" Kuda quickly returned the wallet to its proper place in her back pocket. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Please come down so we can actually talk instead of shouting at each other." He hesitated a moment longer before finally, Shoyuta started to make his way back down to ground level. Once his feet were safely back on the ground, he reeled his capture weapon back in around his neck and shoulders and gestured with his hand to the entrance of the alleyway. "After you." Shoyuta didn't take his eyes off of her as they exited the alleyway. The 2 crows stared back, far too much intelligence for a regular animal bleeding through their beady black eyes as they glared at him, leaving Shoyuta feeling unsettled. The fact they had both turned their heads a whole 180 degrees only added to the effect. Both were wearing small black plastic bracelets on one of their feet, each with a large plastic button. Shoyuta idly wondered if they were some sort of tracking devices. They ended up at a place that was a mix between cafe and fast food restaurant. They passed an outdoor seating area as they walked in. The inside was nice enough, chairs and tables set up around the front of the shop, an L-shaped counter in the back right corner and a row of booths along the left. Besides the person behind the counter and the people occupying the two tables closest to the windows, the place was empty. Music played in the back somewhere and floated through the open door to the kitchen, and the whole place smelled of coffee and fried food. Kuda made a beeline for one of the empty booths at the back and sat down, Shoyuta sitting across from her. As he was stared down by 3 sets of eyes, he briefly wondered if she came here often, considering no one had batted an eye at the 2 crows perched on her shoulders. It was confirmed when a server came to take their orders and asked Kuda if she wanted the usual. Kuda nodded and thanked the server. Shoyuta ordered himself a cappuccino. Once the server had left, Shoyuta leaned forward and raised an eyebrow at Kuda. "So, what's a private investigator doing following a pro hero around?" Kuda looked Shoyuta up and down, scrutinizing him. "I'm your protection detail." Shoyuta gaped at her. "I beg your pardon? A pro hero needing protection?" It was ludicrous. Generally, it was the pro heroes doing the protecting, not the other way around. Kuda shrugged. "Yeah, I don't get it either. When my client asked me to watch over you, I thought it was a joke. I spent the last 8 weeks trying to figure it out, but I've got nothing." Shoyuta held up his hand. "Hold on, wait. What do you mean you've been watching me for 8 weeks? Surely she was exaggerating. He'd only noticed her watching him today. There was no way she had been watching him for so long without him noticing. Kuda's lips curled in a small smug smile. "I'm good at my job." Shoyuta shook his head. "How didn't I notice?" Kuda actually looked almost bad for him then. No one ever suspects the crows and the pigeons and the stray cats they see every day to be watching and reporting back to someone. Shoyuta stared at the table as he went back over the past couple of weeks. He had noticed that there had been an increase in the number of crows hanging around his apartment that he'd chalked up to someone feeding them. And that cat that had been following him on patrol that was too well looked after to be a stray, he'd thought it just wanted the cat treats he carried in one of his belt pouches. Hizashi had even complained about pigeons shitting all over their balcony. Shoyuta leaned back with a quiet curse. What he didn't get was who thought he was important enough to put a guard on. His immediate thought was of Midoriya, but it just didn't fit. If Midoriya could hack into the HPSC's secure database, surely hacking into every piece of technology Shuta's even spared a glance at wouldn't be an issue. As if reading his thoughts, Kuda shook her head. "I asked about this position when I first got it, and all I got was that it was classified." "Who hired you?" he asked. "That's the part that makes the least sense," she frowned. "Why would All Might care about an underground hero?" Shuta's whole body jerked in shock. "What?" One of the patrons on the other side of the room and the woman behind the counter looked at Shoyuta sharply, but he hardly noticed. He leaned forward and stared intently at Kuda. "Tell me everything about how and why you were hired to watch me." Kuda scrutinized him for a few seconds, clearly weighing on something before she sighed. "Well, first things first, I may have left a few things out when I was introducing myself." She dug into her bag and pulled out another wallet. This was the wallet she used day to day. It held her cash and cards. It also held her reserve hero license. Shuta's eyes widened when he looked it over. "Your Whisper?" She was a legend in the underground scene. She retired not long before Shoyuta graduated UA after a short but prolific career. She single-handedly took down an entire Yakuza and 2 separate human trafficking rings over the course of her career. Don't even get Shoyuta started on all of the drag operations she razed to the ground. She was the queen of the underground. Her reign may have ended, but that fact didn't make Shuta's sudden urge to bow before her disappear. Whisper nodded. "I retired from hero work 6 years ago to become a PI. Better hours, better pay, and less chance of finding myself chopped up and stuffed in a suitcase in a dump. If you ever get the chance to retire, I recommend it." She took a deep breath. 8 weeks or so ago I was approached by Sir Night Eye on behalf of his boss. It took Shoyuta a second to place the name of the sidekick, but when he did his eyes widened. "Wait, Night." He pulled out his phone before Googling the man. When the pictures loaded he let out a groan. I met him once, he didn't tell me his name and I didn't recognize him. He thought back to that fateful car ride. Oh God. Oh God. The blonde male STRP wasn't a male STRP after all. That was God Med All Might. The server reappeared then, placing Shuda's cappuccino in front of him and Whisper's black coffee in front of her. The server gave a short bow before heading back behind the counter. Shoyuta barely noticed her, too busy having a crisis. Whisper looked concerned. You okay over there? No, he croaked out. Oh God, he had the symbol of peace's personal number. Do you know why the big man wants you under protection? Whisper asked, taking a sip of her coffee. Shoyuta played the interrogation over in his head with new eyes. I have recently acquired an informant, he revealed hesitantly. Whisper nodded and raised her eyebrows in a cue for him to continue. Are they any good? Shoyuta grimaced. After passing on some information for my informant, I ended up getting interrogated by 3 men in the back of a black SUV with tinted windows. Whisper whistled long and low. Wow. Shoyuta took a sip of his cappuccino and shook his head. You have no idea. So what was it that got the big man's attention? They didn't tell me anything, didn't even bother mentioning you have a son. Shoyuta spit out his coffee before rapidly skiing in a breath, only for a few drops of coffee to get Izzy back down into his lungs. He coughed and sputtered, causing everyone in the vicinity to crane their necks to try to get a look at who was making all the noise. Shoyuta briefly hoped he would choke to death just to get out of this conversation. Alas, he was able to breathe again after only 30 seconds of almost coughing his lungs out. What? Shoyuta wheezed. Whisper narrowed her eyes and looked him up and down. A son. Shoyuta grabbed some napkins to mop up the coffee he had spit out as he shook his head. I don't have any kids. He shook his head again, more forcefully this time. You're saying the little boy with dark green hair that looks and acts just like you isn't yours? Whisper raised her eyebrow in a show of doubt. Shoyuta nodded vehemently. Whisper ticked her eyebrows up in a show of disbelief before continuing. Regardless, I'm watching his home too. Shoyuta nodded. Okay, whatever. Shoyuta wasn't going to linger on that particular topic. He cleared his throat. I'm still not quite sure why you were hired to watch me, he admitted. Could it have something to do with what they were talking about in the car? This all for one villain? Who was he, and why did the mention of his name scare All Might? He decided he could ask the brat about that later. Right now he wanted to focus on the problem at hand. What I don't get is, why blow your cover? You were able to watch me for 2 months without me being any the wiser. Why give yourself up now? Whisper pursed her lips. I may not be a hero anymore, but that doesn't mean I lost all of my morals. I followed villains, I stalked them, learned everything there was to know about them, and then I brought them down. Doing that to someone who hasn't done anything wrong, a hero just trying to do his job, it didn't sit right with me. She shook her head. Undergrounders need to stick together, you know? She fiddled with her spoon, making it clack against the plate. Just because we don't have merchandise deals and radio show segments, the spotlighters think they can treat us like crap. She shook her head. Another thing I don't miss. Shoyuta grimaced. He'd had his fair share of spotlighters treat him like a glorified paper pusher when he had to team up for a case just because they didn't recognize him, so he knew exactly where she was coming from. It was why he worked almost exclusively with other undergrounders if he could help it. Even Hizashi had been guilty of it at one point early on in his career, something that Shoyuta made sure to nip in the bud quickly. Last he heard through the underground gossip ring, Hizashi was one of the few, good, spotlighters that undergrounders would tolerate working with, going so far as to directly request his help on cases that required extra muscle. Shoyuta nodded in understanding. Thank you for the heads up. I'll do what I can to make sure you don't face repercussions for this. I'm sure you're being paid a pretty penny for this job. Whisper chuckled. You have no idea, she parroted. His earlier words back at him. At this rate, I'll be able to send Kuji to any high school or college he wants just by watching you walk down to the konbini and back at 3 in the morning. Shuda's face heated up in embarrassment even before he managed to process all of what she had said. When it did process, he tilted his head in question. Kuji? Whisper froze. She obviously hadn't meant to let that slip. She watched Shoyuta like a hawk as she elaborated. My son. He's 5. She looked past him, a look in her eyes like she wasn't really present. I have enemies that would try to hurt him if they knew about him, so I would appreciate it if you didn't mention him to anyone. Well, that would explain why she retired so early. Shoyuta slowly nodded. You have my word. Whisper gave him the hint of a smile. I need to head off now. If you need to get a hold of me, let my birds know and they'll pass your message along. Shoyuta grunted his ascension and watched as Whisper left the cafe. He stayed in the booth for a few moments, just mulling the information over. Then he cursed when he realized Whisper had stuck him with the bill. He sighed as he went up to the counter to pay for the drinks. His phone buzzed in his pocket as he left the cafe. He checked it to find a text from Zashi. Fiancé smiling catface with heart eyes. Babe, where are you? I'm so lonely. Shoyuta sent him a quick reply. Got caught up in something and I might be a while. 3 seconds after Shoyuta sent the text, 3 dots appeared telling him Hizashi was typing. Fiancé smiling catface with heart eyes. Okay babe, come home soon, face blowing kiss. Shuta's face heated up at the sight of the emoji like he was 16 and crushing on his best friend all over again. He quickly locked his phone and stuffed it back into his pocket as he left the cafe to continue on his original mission, buying movie night snacks. Hizashi greeted him as soon as he stepped through the door with a quick kiss. Hey babe. He relieved Shoyuta of the plastic bags he was carrying, placing them on the floor by their feet before he went back in for another kiss, more heated than the last. Shoyuta returned the kiss for a few seconds before gently pushing his fiancé, man, that never got old, away. Hizashi pouted but dutifully picked up the plastic bags from where he placed them and took them to the kitchen as Shoyuta changed into his house slippers. Once done, he quietly padded after Hizashi to help unload the bags. For a few seconds he debated on how exactly he should tell Hizashi what had happened on his trip, eventually deciding that being straightforward and concise was probably his best option. Sorry I took so long, it turns out I'm being watched. Hizashi dropped the dorayaki he was holding, letting it fall to the floor with a small thud and crinkle of plastic. What? Don't worry, I'm going to get it all sorted out, Shoyuta reassured his fiancé. Hizashi gaped at him. That's not. Who's watching you? Why are they watching you? Shoyuta unpacked the rest of the bag he was working on as he spoke. I'm being watched by a former underground hero who was hired by Dash. Perhaps it isn't a good idea to tell Hizashi that All Might himself had ordered it, someone I'm working with on a case. I'm going to make a couple of calls real quick, okay? Love you. He folded up the plastic bag and shoved it in their plastic bag drawer before placing a peck on Hizashi's cheek. Before Hizashi could react, Shoyuta had retreated to their bedroom for privacy. He quickly pulled out his phone and made his first call. The phone rang 4 times before it was picked up. What's going on? Midoriya sounded out of breath as he answered the phone. Why do you assume something is going on? Shoyuta asked just to be contrary. You hate making phone calls. If it wasn't urgent you'd just leave me a text. So what's going on? Shoyuta grumbled under his breath. Did you know I was being watched? There was a beat of silence. So about that. Shoyuta glared at the bedside lamp in front of him. You knew. Why didn't you say anything? He couldn't understand it. Why wouldn't he tell him? Well, you see, as part of my quirk my memory is really good. In theory I can remember my whole life in near-perfect clarity, but, well, my memory still needs to be jogged, like looking for files on a computer hard drive and, well... You forgot to mention it? Shoyuta asked, incredulously. Midoriya laughed nervously. Maybe. Shoyuta shook his head. This goddamn kid. He sighed before forcing himself to move on. Do you know why I'm being watched? I only knew you were being watched and by who, not why, though I could guess. There was a deep metallic rattling on the other end of the line. Shoyuta furrowed his brow. What are you doing? Climbing a fire escape to a roof for privacy, Midoriya answered. Shuta's first reaction was wanting to ask if that was safe before he remembered who he was talking to. All Might hired Whisper to watch over me for my protection. Yeah, that tracks, Midoriya said. Shoyuta waited for him to elaborate but he didn't. Why does that make sense? All Might just found out that there is a pro hero with the ability to cancel quirks. He'll want to keep you close for the inevitable showdown with a villain who has hundreds of stolen quirks at his disposal. Shoyuta recoiled. What do you, hundreds of stolen quirks? There was a conspicuous silence on the other end of the line. Then, I am suddenly getting the feeling that I may have forgotten to mention a couple things. Shoyuta was going to set Midoriya on fire the next time he saw him. Start talking right now or I swear to God dash. All for One is a villain who goes by the same name as his quirk. He can take and give people's quirks, but he can also keep them for himself. He's an evil deech who wants All Might's head on a pike and to take over Japan and turn it into a dictatorship. Oh, he's also like 200 years old. Shoyuta sat heavily on the edge of the bed as he processed the information. 200 years old. Hundreds of quirks, has a hate hard-on for All Might. What the F dash? Well, because of your quirk, you're the perfect counter to his quirk, so in the eventual showdown you'll be a valuable ally. Maybe this time, now that All Might knows you exist before the fight, he'll bring you along and he won't lose his stomach and a lung because I've lost internal organs before and external ones, and let me tell you it hurts like a beach and coughing up blood all the time must get old fast and dash. Midoriya rambled on and on as Shoyuta remained silent, simply trying to wrap his head around the idea of somebody like All for One existing. And the prosthetic was made by my good friend May, and she might be a little bit insane, which is fine because I am too, so we got along like a house on fire. Anyways, she kitted out with a mini chainsaw attachment, but she didn't tell me, so I found out when I accidentally dash. Once Shuta's brain had had a chance to reboot, he cut Midoriya off. Stop talking. He heard Midoriya's mouth snap shut with a click on the other end of the line and sighed. I'm just going to stop you right there. Sorry, I was worried when you stopped talking and I thought maybe you'd tell me you didn't want to help me anymore with, like, taking down the government and stuff and dash. Midoriya? Yes. Shut up. Midoriya finally stopped talking and Shoyuta breathed a sigh of relief. Okay. He paused, giving his brain time to form a sentence that almost made sense. So tonight, I'm just going to ignore the whole All for One thing and just focus on chewing out All Might for thinking I need a babysitter. You can brief me on All for One once I've slept. He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly feeling exhausted. How do you even have the symbol of Peace's personal phone number in the first place? Shoyuta couldn't help but ask. Permission to speak? Midoriya asked. Shoyuta rolled his eyes. Permission granted. He was my mentor, Midoriya replied cryptically. Shoyuta sighed. Well, I'm going to call him now and tell him he's an idiot. Oh. When you do, make sure you... Toshinori nearly missed the rooftop he was aiming for when his personal cell buzzed. Knowing there was only one person it could be, he answered without looking at the caller. Eraserhead. To what do I owe the pleasure? I do not appreciate being put under surveillance without my knowledge or consent, came Eraserhead's very set-off sounding drawl through the speaker. Toshinori, who had been crouched as he prepared for his next jump, lost his balance, falling on his butt with a very undignified sound. Eraserhead. It was merely a precaution. All for One is extremely dangerous dash. We will have a meeting with Whisper-san tomorrow to discuss the new arrangement. Show up or don't at your own peril. Eraser cut him off. Oh, of course. Toshinori sat there on the roof feeling like a scolded child. Also, Eraserhead continued, I have been instructed by my informant to tell you that you are a stupid geeky. Good day. And with that, he promptly hung up, leaving Toshinori feeling like he had been kicked in the face and staring into the distance with a pained expression on his face. A Mighty Heartbreak by Akitani Mikumo. Earlier today, shocking images emerged on Twitter of the symbol of peace in what appeared to be emotional distress on the rooftop of the Hikari Casino in West Tokyo after receiving a phone call while in the middle of his patrol. Image description: All Might in full costume curled in the fetal position on a rooftop, phone clutched in his hand as he stared into the middle distance with a look of horror and regret on his face. The owner of the Twitter account that first posted the photos was able to confirm with us that they were the one who had taken the photos. Furthermore, They additionally were able to verify that All Might received a call at around 4:06 p.m. that only lasted a few minutes before the caller hung up, though it is unknown what the two talked about. With the mighty agency refusing to make a statement on All Might's behalf, we the public have been forced to speculate on what could have caused such a reaction in a man like All Might, the most popular theory being a secret lover who decided to end things today. Fans around the world have latched onto this theory and have begun sending gifts to Mighty Agency, ranging from condolence cards to chocolates and stuffed animals. A worker inside the Mighty Agency's mailroom has been quoted as saying, "It's pandemonium. We get anywhere from 2 to 10,000 pieces of mail a day, but today we've received close to 20,000 and counting." All Might is reported to have finished his patrol early and retreated to Mighty Tower. While he has not commented on the incident, he thanked his fans for the gifts with a short but heartfelt tweet from the official All Might Twitter account. All Might Official at AM Official 4:23 p.m. Thank you everyone for the gifts and kind words. You all have no idea how much each and every one means to me. Keep being awesome, plus ultra. Quotes 362 retweets 9K 134K. What are your thoughts on this? Let us know by tagging your tweet with hashtag H5AMBU for a chance to be featured in one of our articles. Izuku had to restrain himself from miming inappropriately as he took the first sip of coffee he'd had since he died and came back over 10 months ago. God, that was the sheet. Eraser rolled his eyes from across the table as he sipped his own drink. Hypocrite. Izuku would like to see him try to survive without coffee for months on end. Izuku hadn't even realized quite how much he missed it until that first sip. He savored the bittersweet taste on his tongue before swallowing. Nothing could beat a properly brewed cup of coffee. Except maybe the taste of a finely aged whiskey. When one lived as long as Izuku had, they needed to learn to take joy in the small things in life. Like his mum's katsudon. And mildly inconveniencing people. And putting a bullet between muscular eyes. And rainbows. And for Izuku, coffee was one of those things. It was such a shame his access to coffee was so limited as a kid. At least it used to be. Now though, Izuku had Eraser. The underground hero glared at Izuku as he took his time to enjoy his coffee. Izuku raised an eyebrow. What? You can have coffee whenever you want. I can only have coffee when I have an adult accomplice who completely disregards the impacts of caffeine on a developing child. Eraser grumbled something unintelligible before taking another sip of his hot chocolate. When he put his mug back down, he asked, "Why couldn't you just order yourself a coffee? Why go through all the trouble of switching out our drinks when the waitress wasn't looking?" Izuku stared at Eraser, trying and failing to convey exactly how stupid a question that was through his driest deadpan stare. Because no normal person would knowingly give a 5-year-old a drink that contains 3 shots of espresso? "Hello, handsome," Izuku heard an unfamiliar voice drawl from across the coffee shop they were sitting in. It seemed Eraser didn't recognize the voice either, so they both ignored it. "Well then, maybe you shouldn't be drinking coffee in the first." Eraser was cut off when a woman approached the table. "Hey there." She pet her hip against their table, her whole body angled towards Eraser, blatantly ignoring Izuku. Eraser looked the woman up and down in confusion before turning back to Izuku, raising an eyebrow. "Do you know her?" Izuku shook his head as he too looked the woman over to see if he recognized her from somewhere. The woman barely spared Izuku a glance before turning back to Eraser. "No, you don't know me, but I'd like to get to know you," she demurred. Izuku raised his eyebrows. He might be irritated at her for interrupting them, but he could admire her boldness, even if she didn't have a snowball's chance in hell with Eraser. It was at this moment both he and Eraser noticed the group of women eagerly watching the interaction. A spot at the table looked like it had very recently been vacated, judging by the half-empty glass on the table and the jacket slung over the back of the chair. She must have been having brunch with her friends when she spied Eraser and decided to shoot her shot. She had long purple hair that curled down her back and nice bone structure, the shiny iridescent scales dotting her cheeks emphasizing her nice high cheekbones and jawline. She was beautiful, and judging from the way she held herself, she knew it. Eraser turned back to the woman, looking uncomfortable. "I'm busy right now, sorry." He didn't sound sorry in the least, but the woman ignored it. "Come on, I'm sure your kid won't mind if we chat for a bit, the woman wheedled, already half into the booth next to Izuku. Izuku bit his lip hard to stop himself from laughing. Oh God, she thought Eraser was his dad. This was going to be so much fun. Eraser had already opened his mouth to deny the assumption, but Izuku beat him to the punch, his innocent kid mask firmly in place. Daddy, why is she acting weird? Eraser's head snapped towards him so fast that Izuku genuinely worried about the poor man getting whiplash. The woman turned to Izuku with a conspiratorial look on her face. I just think your daddy's handsome and want to chat for a bit. Izuku screwed his face up in faux confusion. Daddy's handsome? He then turned to squint at Eraser, who looked 3 seconds away from running out the door and leaving Izuku behind. I don't see it, he said decisively before raising his mug to his lips to hide his sly grin. Eraser closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, looking all the world like he was restraining himself from reaching across the table and throttling Izuku. He opened his eyes once more and sent an unimpressed look at the woman. You seem nice, he said slowly in a tone that implied the opposite, but I'm really not interested. The woman tilted her head. Don't be like that, hun. I just want to have a little chat. Izuku pursed his lips. He had quickly gone from admiring this woman's boldness to being creeped out by her persistence. Couldn't she tell she was making Eraser uncomfortable? Izuku cracked his knuckles under the table. It was on. This poor woman wouldn't know what hit her. Oh, how he missed being a menace to society. Who's your favorite hero? Izuku said, drawing attention away from poor Eraser, who looked at him in suspicion. He didn't wait for a response before barreling on. My favorite is All Might. I watch his debut video all the time, and I listen to his interviews, and I have a lot of All Might merch. My favorite is my All Might onesie. It's so soft. The woman was frozen like a deer in the headlights as Izuku hijacked the conversation, talking a mile a minute, but he showed her no mercy. Did you know All Might could throw someone into space if he really wanted to? If he put a villain with enough force at the right angle, they would leave the Earth's atmosphere and suffocate in the vacuum of space. This was true. Izuku would know since he had done the math before creating his beloved sun putter, 3,000 during his villain loop. It had been unspeakably cathartic to watch Mineta exit the Earth's atmosphere and hurtle towards the sun on his telescope. Being a villain was such great stress relief when you knew that there were no long-lasting consequences. The woman had paled considerably. Oh, that's nice. Izuku nodded a touch too enthusiastically, purposefully stretching his grin just a tad too wide to be normal. Eraser looked on with an expression of someone watching something both beautiful and horrifying at the same time. Izuku continued on his rant, explaining in excruciating detail how All Might could turn someone's internal organs to soup with a single punch or permanently deafen someone with a shockwave if they were too close. The look on the woman's face as he described in graphic detail how All Might could rip someone's head off with his bare hands was better than Cain. God, this was the most fun he'd had in years. But even as he described how All Might could theoretically slow cook someone by punching them over and over again and again, the woman refused to leave, frozen in place and looking like she was witnessing a train derailment in slow motion. Time to up the ante. He changed the subject, talking about how the hot chocolate here was delicious and lulling the 2 other occupants of the booth into a false sense of security. The lady had gone back to switching between trying to catch Eraser's eye and very obviously undressing him with her eyes. Izuku sipped calmly at his cooling coffee before he dropped the bombshell. Daddy, can we pick up some more flowers before we visit Mummy's grave later? Both Eraser's and the mystery woman's eyes widened in horror, but for 2 very different reasons. The lady was looking back and forth between him and Eraser, face pale and eyes wide. Eraser on the other hand swallowed hard before clearing his throat once, twice. Izuku worried for a moment that Eraser would shut him down after going too far, but it was for naught. Sure, kiddo, you can pick out which ones you want to get for her. Izuku almost screamed in delight when Eraser played along. This was easily the height of his year. One of the top 10 moments of his whole life. He wished he could record this. The woman also cleared her throat. I'm sorry for your loss. Eraser solemnly bowed his head. It's been a tough couple of months. I couldn't have done it without you, kiddo, Eraser added with a small smile at Izuku. Wow, Eraser was so good at acting and thinking on the fly. He looked almost fond of Izuku as he smiled at him. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, which were refusing to meet his or Eraser's gazes. I'll just be going. She quickly got up and headed back towards her table without a single glance back. Izuku and Eraser watched her leave before turning to look at each other, both of them hiding manic grins behind their mugs. They raced to finish their drinks and leave before the woman could finish retelling the events of the past 5 minutes to her friends, all of them sending horrified looks their way. Once they had put some distance between themselves and the cafe, Eraser turned on Izuku. What the hell was that? Izuku smiled unrepentantly. She was being pushy. I miss being a menace to the general public, and she was just right there. Did you have to traumatize her? Eraser asked with a raised eyebrow. Well, maybe she shouldn't be hitting on people who are clearly not interested. Izuku crossed his arms, standing his ground. Eraser shook his head but didn't say anything else on the subject, instead tightening his grip on the messenger bag slung over his shoulder. Where are we even going anyways? You just said to meet you at the park today and to bring the equipment. You're always so needlessly cryptic. Izuku smiled up at Eraser innocently. Needlessly cryptic? Never. Anyways, you'll see where we're going soon enough. I'm going to go ahead and add overly sarcastic and ominous to your list of adjectives, Eraser grumbled. Izuku's expression didn't change as he sat on a bench on the street corner and patted the spot next to him. Eraser grumbled as he dropped down onto the bench, placing the messenger bag between the two. Izuku pulled the bag closer towards him and unzipped it, reaching in to pull out the small metal case inside. With deft fingers, Izuku unlatched the case. The gun inside was modeled after a 9mm Glock. Eraser had taken him to a gun range so he could practice with it, and Izuku had been impressed. It didn't have as much range as a real Glock, so Izuku would have to get close to his targets, but the note left with a cartridge of live needle-tipped canisters said that they were full of a fast-acting sedative, so that shouldn't be a problem. When he'd shot the training dummies at the range with the empty practice canisters, the needle managed to penetrate the dummies' clothing and pierce the skin from 50 meters away. It was a mostly safe and humane way to take down the many criminals on Izuku's sheet list. Perhaps a little too humane for today's targets. It was a shame that Izuku didn't have enough time to lace the canisters with something a little more painful for this particular job. Izuku guessed he'd just have to get creative in making his prey suffer. So, what's the plan? Eraser asked, watching Izuku check over the gun with obvious interest. What time is it? Izuku asked instead of answering, loading the cartridge and chambering one of the canisters. Eraser checked his watch. Nearly 1 What's the exact time? Izuku sent a sad look at the finely tooled leather holster in the bottom of the case. It was too conspicuous, so he left it in the case. Izuku double-checked the safety was on before he unzipped his coat and tucked the barrel into the waistband at the back of his pants. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. It's 12:58. Eraser answered. Izuku turned a little on the bench to get a better look at the bank across the street. On cue, a group of 3 men in masks exited the alleyway a few shops down and headed straight for the bank. Izuku quickly stuffed the case back into Eraser's messenger bag and zipped it up before moving it at Eraser. Let's go. Izuku speed walked towards the alleyway, Eraser easily keeping stride with his longer legs. They stepped inside, Izuku noting the white van idling inside as he headed for a doorway set deep into the brick wall, creating an alcove. Eraser, find a good sight line. Their quirks are all emitters and they're all dangerous. Eraser nodded and disappeared to do as asked while Izuku tucked himself deeper into the alcove and pulled the gun from his waistband. The textured grip was warm in his hands. He squeezed it for a second before taking a deep breath and letting it out, letting most of the tension in his body escape with it. He knew what he was doing. He had nothing to worry about. They waited for seemed like both an eternity and a blink of an eye. The sound of trash blowing in the wind set Izuku's teeth on edge, but he managed to keep it together. Loud footsteps announced the return of 3 men. They ran into the alleyway, bags of money in tow, swinging with each step. Izuku stepped out of his hiding spot with the gun raised, aiming and firing. The gun bucked in his hands with every shot, but Izuku was prepared. He hit each man's center mass, the shiny black canisters glinting in the dim light of the alleyway like beetle wings. One by one, the men dropped like flies as the sedative kicked in. Izuku took great pleasure in watching the leader's knees buckle, sending him to the ground. His face landing in a dirty puddle covered in a rainbow sheen of oil was just the icing on the cake. Izuku was so focused on the leader he didn't notice the man on the far left, the last one to get hit, fumbling for something in his jacket until the barrel of a gun was pointed at him. For a moment, Izuku felt a thrill of sweet anticipation. With Eraser erasing all of their quirks, one shot from the masked man and Izuku would finally have what he wanted. He would be dead, and there would be nothing anyone could do. That lasted only a second before the realization hit him like being dunked in icy water. Izuku couldn't die yet. He had too much he had to do before he died, too many people he still needed to save. Izuku tried ducking out of the way, but he was too slow, too small, too clumsy. He may have the experience of a retired pro hero, but he still had the body of a small child. A weak, defenseless small child. A shot went off. Izuku hit the ground and rolled, coming to a stop against a wheel of the van. Midoriya! Get back! Eraser's panicked voice called. Izuku looked up then to see a gray tendril of capture weapon around the third man's arm, forcing it up and away from Izuku. Izuku followed Eraser's instructions, ducking back into the alcove. Once he was out of sight, he began checking himself over. No burning pain. No suspicious patches of blood. No gunshot. Izuku had nearly gotten himself killed because of his pettiness. But that wasn't what scared him. What made his mouth dry, his heart race and his hands shake was how, when he was face to face with a final, permanent death, Izuku realized he didn't want to die. No, that wasn't quite right. He wanted to die. He wanted to finally be at peace. But in that moment, as he stared down the barrel of the gun, he couldn't lie to himself about how much he cared about making sure he finished what he started, in making sure that when he died, he was making the world a better place for the people he loved. It scared him. For so long, he didn't care about what happened, to him or to the people he loved. Why should he when all it took for him to make it right again was die? But now he had a real chance at a happily ever after. Now, he had something to lose. Izuku was still holding the gun, and when he heard footsteps, he reacted on instinct. He raised the gun and lined up the sights, only to stop when he caught sight of Eraser's wide eyes and raised hands. He quickly lowered the gun, checking it over and putting the safety back on before stuffing it back in the waistband of his pants. Izuku didn't look up when Eraser's soft voice asked, "You okay?" Izuku nodded shakily, still not meeting Eraser's eyes. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, I guess. I stayed to watch the assholes fall instead of getting the hell out, and I nearly paid the price. Izuku looked down at his bright red shoes, a little dirty from rolling around on the ground. He swallowed. Thanks for the save. Yeah, Eraser drew the word out, no problem, kid. Izuku got back up onto his feet and peered out of the alcove. The three men were laying on the ground, unconscious, hands cuffed behind their backs. Izuku stepped out of the alcove and walked up to the men, reaching down and pulling their balaclavas off one by one. Nemoto Shin, quirk, confession. Kurono Hari, quirk, chronostasis. Chisaki Kai, quirk, overhaul. The three lay trussed up and unconscious in the filthy alleyway. The bag Nemoto had been carrying had fallen open and a few loose 10,000 yen bills had been caught in the breeze, fluttering along the concrete like autumn leaves. Izuku wanted nothing more at that moment than to curb stomp Chisaki for what he did to Eri. What he would do to her if fate were left to run its course. He settled for kicking his butt hard enough to make his whole body shudder with the force. They were all going to prison for a long time, where they wouldn't be able to hurt anyone. While Eraser called the cops, Izuku climbed up to the roof to hide. Within 5 minutes a police van had arrived and 2 helpful officers were loading the 3 Yakuza into the back while yet more officers interrogated Eraser. "So you're a pro hero?" Cop number 1 asked. Eraser sighed. There was a rustling of clothing before the cops hummed. "Okay, pro hero Eraserhead, mind telling us what happened here?" Cop number 2 asked. I was on my way to the store when I heard a gunshot and came to investigate. I found 3 unconscious people in balaclavas on the ground next to a couple of bags of cash. I cuffed them and called you guys. And you just happened to have a couple of pairs of quirk suppressant cuffs on you? Cop 1 hashtag sounded skeptical. And my hero license support gear, 2 lock-picking sets, a taser and a knife, Eraser listed off casually. Izuku raised an eyebrow from where he was hiding. Eraser was definitely wearing at least 3 knives that Izuku knew about. Also, since when had Eraser started carrying a taser? My husband says I'm paranoid, but I like to think of myself as prepared. The cops were both silent for a beat, and Izuku wished he could see their expressions at that. He figured they had to be similar to the faces of the security personnel that time Izuku's class at UA had gone on a trip to a medium security prison to talk to some of the inmates. Eraser had spent a solid 10 minutes ridding himself of tools and weapons, from 3 different sets of lockpicks and 2 different multi-tools, daggers and shurikens, and even poison-coated spikes in his boots. Don't even get Izuku started on the god-made razor blade he'd pulled out from under his tongue. The man only got more paranoid as he got older. Izuku had once walked in on him talking to Hatsum about weaponizing his prosthetic leg. He had promptly turned on his heel and shut the door behind him. When the cops finally dispersed, Izuku climbed back down into the alleyway where Eraser was waiting, arms crossed and tapping his foot impatiently. Izuku had to pause when he was reminded of a time he'd been 15, 43, and had snuck out of the house looking for something to numb the pain of existence. He'd come home at noon with bloodshot eyes and smelling like a liquor store. His mum had worn the same expression then that Eraser was wearing now, fear, worry and anger wrapped in a thorny package. We gonna talk about it? Eraser asked as Izuku's feet finally reached the ground once more. Nope. Izuku said, popping the P as he swung the strap of the messenger bag over his head. Eraser sighed. Kid dash, he warned only to be cut off by Izuku. I'm fine. It was a dumb mistake, and it won't happen again. You're right it won't, because I'm not letting you do something like this ever again, Eraser said calmly. What? You can't be serious? Izuku asked. He looked up at Eraser once more and found determination in his dark eyes. You can't do this. Watch me. Eraser yelled. You nearly got yourself killed today. Eraser's face was pale and his hair writhed around his face, an effect that couldn't be completely attributed to the slight breeze. Izuku threw up his arms. His face was hot and his stomach was in knots. And I told you it was a dumb mistake. Eraser whirled on Izuku. He took a step towards Izuku, finger pointed in accusation, eyes flickering red. A dumb mistake. I nearly ended up with a dead child at my feet today. A dead child who couldn't come back because I was erasing his quirk when some punk with a gun shot him. Izuku wrapped his arms around his stomach. I'm sorry. It was stupid, okay? I know it was stupid. Can we please just drop it? They were both yelling, but neither of them cared about any attention they might call to themselves. Eraser crossed his arms over his chest, bringing one hand up to pinch the bridge of his nose. I shouldn't have even brought you out into the field in the first place. Retired pro or not, you're a child. Izuku brought his arms up from where they were wrapped around his middle, crossing them over his chest instead. A child that snuck into a compound guarded by pro heroes. A child that could give you the names of all the major villains of the next 20 years and ways to stop them before they become threats. None of that matters if you die. Eraser paced as he continued to work himself up. What happens if you die on my watch and your quirk brings you back? What then? How long will it take for you to go after Zashi to get what you want? Eraser shook his head. I can't let that happen. There was the real root of the issue. He was worried that if Izuku died and came back, no matter if his death was accidental or not, he would simply lash out. Izuku cringed as he remembered the threat he'd made the first time they met. He'd needed a way to ensure Eraser didn't talk and potentially put them all in danger, and it had been the only card he had to play. Didn't mean he didn't regret it. Izuku sighed. That's not going to happen. He ran his fingers through his hair. Eraser, look. He took a deep breath. It's not going to happen. My quirk, I guess you could say it gives me a unique perspective on things. People die all the time, from all sorts of things. I've died from all sorts of things. I've been shot, stabbed, turned into dust, poisoned. I've also been electrocuted in a freak lab accident. I've choked to death on a chicken wing. I've been in my fair share of accidents, so I know just how easily they can happen. No one is ever truly safe. Tomorrow I might get crushed to death by a falling anvil, and you wouldn't be able to do anything about it. If that happened, you can bet I'd be showing up on your doorstep at 6 in the morning again. Eraser had gone pale as a sheet, his eyes dark and watery as he stared at Izuku. How can I trust you? You threatened the love of my life. You've admitted to being a hero, but you've also admitted to being a villain. How can I trust you to keep your word? Izuku was quiet for a while as he arranged his thoughts. It took a few minutes, but finally he spoke. When I first learned what a hero was, I knew that that was what I wanted to be. I wanted to save people with a smile like All Might. It took me 4 tries to finally get it right. To stop All for One, to stop the war from happening, and to save the hundreds of thousands of people who would have died otherwise. After I defeated him, I got married. I was blessed with 2 children and a grandchild before I died peacefully in bed from old age, surrounded by my friends and family. And then I woke up and all of my hard work was undone in an instant. Suddenly I was 4 years old again, All for One was at large, and I was once more powerless to stop him. What was the point of trying my hardest if everything just reset when I die? Eraser was quiet as he listened, shining eyes trained unerringly on Izuku as he told his story for the first time. I'd fulfilled my destiny, defeated the big bag and the 20 or so other big bags who came after him. Needed to do something different. I speaked it up. Experimented. Found out what worked and what didn't. I had fun when I could, but none of it was really meaningful. I didn't make friends, only friendly acquaintances. But being alone gets old real quick. It stopped being fun, I stopped caring. Nothing mattered. Then, I woke up in my kindergarten again and remembered that you existed. You're my only hope out. My silver bullet. I'm going to finally die, but before I do, I'm going to use this quirk that brought me so much suffering and use it to save as many people as I can. And then when I die, it won't reset. My achievements will actually mean something. But I want to get this right. I have to know that I've made the world a better place before I can leave it, and for that, I'll do this as many times as I need to. Eraser swallowed and took a shaky breath. He looked taken aback, like he didn't know quite what to say in the face of Izuku's impromptu speech. Izuku couldn't quite blame him. He hadn't meant to get carried away like that. He'd opened his mouth and it had all come flooding out, his base human desire to be heard and understood taking over. Finally, Eraser seemed to collect himself. Do you promise? Promise that you won't hurt Zashi? Izuku sighed. There was no point in lying. It wasn't like he'd remember this if it became necessary. If it came down to it, I wouldn't need to hurt Mike to get what I want. I just need to make you think I did to get you to cooperate. Mike is a truly good man, a good hero. I couldn't live with myself if I seriously hurt him. Eraser still looked a little uneasy, but relieved nonetheless. He shook his head. I still don't understand what happened today. You're supposedly a former pro hero, you should know better than to hang around and watch after shooting someone. Izuku scuffed his shoe on the ground. I may be like 200 years old, give or take a couple decades, but I never outgrew my pettiness. In fact, I'm pretty sure I just got more petty with age. Chisaki Kai is a piece of shit who hurt someone I care about, and I couldn't resist watching him face plant in a puddle. Eraser blinked in surprise before shaking his head. Seriously? You put your life in danger just to watch some dickhead eat shit? He glared at the ground. Why am I even surprised at this point? He looked to the sky as if praying, whether for patience, sanity, or maybe a little bit of both, Izuku didn't know. Whatever. I'm still confiscating the gun. Eraser snatched the messenger bag from Izuku before he could react. Izuku scowled and opened his mouth to protest, but he was cut off. I don't want you anywhere near close to the guys we're going to be taking down. He paused before he closed his eyes and sighed. You ever used a sniper rifle before? Izuku blinked in surprise at the seeming non sequitur before he caught on. He grinned. Yeah, here and there. Good, I'm going back to my guy to ask for another one of these, he said, holding up the bag, Sniper Edition. That way you can still do your thing while staying out of range of the fight. Thank God for easily bribed support techs. Naomasa jogged through the police station, a file clutched in his hand as he tried to catch up with the person making their way to the exit. Unfortunately, this particular man was an underground hero who seemed dead set on avoiding him. Eraserhead. Sir. Wait. Eraserhead stopped dead halfway through the door before turning back to face Naomasa with a scowl. I'm busy. Make this quick. But Naomasa couldn't help but feel irritated at the man's attempt to get away. I'll try. Here. He handed the underground hero the file and watched as he quickly read it over. When Eraserhead had finished, he looked back up at Naomasa with a raised eyebrow. For the past couple of months, a vigilante had sprung up seemingly out of nowhere. Their MO was unique. They drugged low-level villains with a strong sedative in the commission of crime, leaving the unconscious villains to be arrested by the authorities. The case baffled the police and the heroes who had seen the vigilantes' handiwork up close and personal. No one had been able to catch even a glimpse of this mysterious vigilante, and they had no lead on their identity besides speculation that they might be in possession of some sort of foresight quirk. For this person to be able to hit so many villains, all over the country without being seen, it was the only thing that made any sense. Because of his experience dealing with vigilantes, the higher-ups had wanted to bring Eraserhead in on the case. Easier said than done considering the man wasn't part of an agency and was almost impossible to get a hold of. Thankfully, Naomasa had heard he'd been in the station to process some thugs and had grabbed the file before chasing the hero down. The chief wants you on the case because of your experience with vigilantes. Will you help us? Eraser pursed his lips. He took a few seconds too long to answer. I'll see what I can do. Naomasa had to resist the urge to narrow his eyes at the underground hero. While he hadn't set off his quirk, something about Eraserhead was setting off Naomasa's bullshit detector. If the police don't solve this case in the next month, the HPSC is going to put their own people on the case. Eraserhead hummed in acknowledgement. I'll have to keep my eyes peeled. Again, no quirk reaction, but Naomasa's bullshit detector was blaring. Make sure to let us know if you find out anything. I will, Eraserhead said. But Naomasa raised his eyebrows. Really? Eraserhead looked startled for a second before his expression smoothed out and turned to stone. I want to bring this vigilante to justice just as much as anyone. But Naomasa's eye twitched at the blatant lie. Eraserhead must have seen it if the way his lips turned up at the ends like he was trying to repress a grin was anything to go by. Naomasa glowered. Do you know something about the vigilante? Eraserhead thinned his lips in a futile attempt to repress his smile. I don't know anything about the vigilante. But Naomasa wanted to throttle this man. So you don't know the vigilante's identity? Of course not. But I have no idea who the vigilante is or what their motive is. I also don't know how they got their hands on a weapon capable of shooting tranquilizer darts at such a long range. I would never aid them in escaping from the law. But Naomasa closed his eyes for a moment to try to control the twitching of his eye. When he opened them again, Eraserhead was grinning like a SDST. Well, I really have to go now. But Eraserhead was silently laughing at Naomasa. He could feel it. We'll see who's laughing when he arrests Eraserhead for obstruction of justice. As he reached for his cuffs, Eraserhead once more opened his mouth. Oh, wait, before I do, I wanted to say. He paused, both to try to compose himself and for maximum effect. Naomasa wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug smirk off his face. My informant and this new vigilante are definitely not the same person. But Naomasa's whole body stilled. His brain stopped working. Had one of the many coffees he'd chugged over the course of his shift been spiked? Because there was no way. I hope you have a nice night. But Naomasa barely even registered the lie. He was numb as he watched Eraserhead leave the station behind. It took him a few minutes to begin moving again, but when he did, he stepped outside, put a cigarette between his lips and lit it. He took a sharp drag to help calm his nerves before pulling out his phone and dialing a number. As he waited for it to pick up, he took another drag, letting it out in a long, slow breath. "Hello." Yagi answered the phone. "Hey Yagi, I need your help in covering up the tranquilizer vigilante case." "What? Tsukachi, what on earth? That's illegal. The vigilante is Gran Torino. Are you volunteering to arrest him?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "Then, consider the whole case dead and buried." The phone beeped as Yagi hung up without another word. Naomasa took another drag of his cigarette. It looked like instead of spending his shift catching up on paperwork, he'd be busy collecting every single paper version of the file and destroying them. Shoyuta spent a solid 5 minutes struggling to press the button for the doorbell with his full mitten-clad hands before giving up and awkwardly kicking the door 3 times. His boots crunched in the fresh snow as he regained his footing. The cold air bit at his exposed skin as snowflakes fell around him in lazy spirals before sticking to every available surface, including Shuta's coat. Whisper-quiet footsteps could barely be heard as someone approached the door. They came to a halt right as the person peered through the peephole for a moment. Once they saw it was Shoyuta, they dropped any subtlety, throwing open the door with "Abandon." Even though he was fully expecting to see her, he nearly didn't recognize Rei. She had cut her hair, the ends barely brushing her chin and pinned back away from her face with colorful clips. She was dressed in a fuzzy jumper, and a pair of fluffy slippers peeked out from under the hem of her soft-looking tracksuit pants. The biggest change, however, was the smile on her face. It wasn't an ear-to-ear grin or a toothy smile. It was small, soft and easy. Shoyuta was pretty sure she didn't even realize she was doing it. It was hard to reconcile this Rei, the smiling, casual Rei, with the cold, quiet, perfectly dressed and pressed housewife he had met all those months ago. "Aizawa-san, it's so good to see you again." She quickly stepped aside to let him in. He kicked off his boots before padding into the kitchen, setting down the 2 overstuffed plastic bags filled with takeout. As he unpacked the food, he looked around. Rei wasn't the only one who had changed. He could hear the children's voices coming from somewhere, along with the sound of the TV playing quietly. The walls that had been bare when he helped move Rei in were now covered in photos of the family. Homey clutter had built up on all of the available flat surfaces, a large decorative bowl of fruit in the middle of the dining table, a clock on the bench, a small glass bowl that looked like it had once been an ashtray held keys and other small odds and ends. He frowned. It was only now that he realized how long it had been since he'd been here. It had been at least a month, between his career and the errands Midoriya was always sending him on. He should have made more of an effort to drop by, maybe taken on some of the guard shifts. "Shoyuta? Is that you?" Shoyuta sighed, suddenly remembering with crystal clarity why he'd been keeping his distance. "Yes, it's me." Before he could react, 2 arms wrapped around his middle and squeezed tight, nearly making Shoyuta choke. As it was, he made an embarrassing wheezing noise as all of the air was forced out of his lungs through clenched teeth. "The love of my life. My light in the darkness. How are you? I haven't seen you in ages." Shoyuta not so gently pushed Emi off of him and turned to face her. "Better when I'm not having the Heimlich maneuver performed on me." Emi was in her work clothes but wasn't on the clock, evident in her relaxed posture. She quickly joined him in unpacking the containers of food. He had been pretty sure he'd managed to buy enough at the store, but now he had laid the containers out on the bench. He couldn't help but worry they wouldn't have enough. "Wow, I haven't seen you in ages. How are you doing?" Emi asked as she turned away to grab a stack of cutlery. "Good, good," Shoyuta answered vaguely. Emi turned on him with a knowing look. You can't lie to me, lover boy." "Yes, I can. We dated for 2 years." "No, you can't. I don't think agreeing to be each other's beards in high school counts as dating." Shook her head. "We were each other's dates to functions." She pointed at him triumphantly. "We were each other's dates, therefore it counts as dating." Shoyuta rolled his eyes and opened his mouth to retort but was interrupted. "You 2 dated?" Shoyuta jumped. Jesus Christ, in those fuzzy house slippers Rei was as silent as a cat. Emi cackled. Shoyuta was so glad that the Emmy found the sight of his soul trying to escape his mortal vessel so funny. He glared at Emmy before turning to Rei. "We fake dated," Shoyuta made sure to reassure her before Emmy could run her mouth. "It was so romantic." Emmy clamped her hands together and brought them under her chin with a faux dreamy expression. Rei's expression went through a range of emotions, from exasperation to sadness and disappointment before finally settling on a neutral mask. Oh boy. Emmy had really done it this time. How could someone so smart be so oblivious? Shoyuta sighed. It seemed it was up to him to stop this ship from destroying itself on the rocky shores of misunderstandings before it even had a chance to sail. "I am very, very gay and Emmy is a useless lesbian." Emmy gasped dramatically. "Shut up. The only useless gay here is you. I will not stand for this." "Wanna bet?" Shoyuta asked smugly. "Could a useless gay do this?" He dramatically whipped off the mitten on his right hand to reveal the simple stainless steel engagement ring. Shoyuta hadn't been sure about the ring at first, but it had made Hizashi so happy to slip the ring on his finger that he had caved. The two women gasped before both lunged for Shuta's hand, grabbing it in unison, their fingers overlapping over his. Now it was Shuta's turn to watch as the two women realized they were indirectly holding hands. Both women were flustered, Emmy giggling nervously and looking away while Rei flushed a delicate pink hue. Ice crackled as Rei lost control of her quirk. Shoyuta canceled her quirk, but not in time to stop her from encasing all three of their hands in a ball of ice. It was at that moment that the four kids spilled into the room, only to halt at the sight of their mum, nice Fukukado-san, and the hero Eraserhead who had helped them get out of that house, all trapped in the world's most awkward handshake. Shoyuta did a double take when he saw Tuya's hair had been dyed black. Rei looked like a deer in the headlights. "Hey, Tuya took in the scene before letting out a long-suffering sigh. "Sure, Mum, I'll melt you out." Tuya stepped forward and placed a hand on the ball of ice. Maybe try to move over the sink?" The three adults awkwardly shuffled towards the sink, holding the ball of ice over the drain before the ice around Tuya's hand began to hiss. Steam rose from the rapidly melting ice as it cracked from the sudden temperature change. As Tuya melted the ice, Shoyuta snuck a quick glance at the children. Rei wasn't the only one who had changed. Shoyuta quietly marveled at the differences. There were so many small differences between the kids that had helped him load the van all those weeks ago and the kids standing in front of him now. They all added up to make them almost unrecognizable. The children he'd met at the estate were stiff and quiet, dressed in charcoal grays, rich navies and pristine white, the brightest splash of color to be seen in the red of their hair. The kids in front of him now were relaxed. Natsuo was leaning against the wall in his bright green jumper. Beside him, Fuyumi fiddled with the big purple plastic clips in her hair and rolled on her ankles absent-mindedly. Shudo stood half a step behind his older sibling and clutched a stuffed flamingo to his chest like a drowning man might clutch a life buoy. The ice around Shoyuta, Emmy and Rei's hands gave one last loud crack before a large chunk broke off, exposing Shoyuta and Emmy's fingers. With a tug, the rest of the ice fell in the sink, freeing them all. Shoyuta quickly pulled his hand away, leaving Rei and Emmy holding hands. Rei and Emmy were both blushing, and Rei tried to pull her hand away, only for Emmy to cover it with her other hand. "Your hands are cold," Emmy said by way of explanation. "Let me warm them up a little." Shoyuta was quick to remind the two lovebirds of their audience. "So can someone tell me where the utensils are so we can begin dishing up the food?" The kids were quick to ignore their mum and Emmy's weirdness in favor of the promise of food. While Tuya pulled a stack of plates down from a cupboard, Fuyumi grabbed a rice paddle from a drawer. They set up the dishes on the dining table, Natsuo taking some plates and helping Tuya set the table while Shudo drifted closer to Shoyuta, head ducked shyly. "Hi, Eraserhead-san." Rei, still holding Emmy's hand as she helped lay containers of food on the table, perked up and addressed the rest of her children. "Say hi to Eraserhead-san." A chorus of "Hi, Eraserhead-san" made Shoyuta chuckle. "You can call me Aizawa-san when I'm not on duty." "Okay, Aizawa-san." "Aizawa-san, do you like my flamingo?" Shudo asked as he moved his toy at Shoyuta for inspection. Shoyuta took the flamingo with care, one hand on either side of the soft body, letting its long legs dangle down. Beady glass eyes stared into Shuda's soul, and he was suddenly reminded of Whisper's crows. All it was missing was the small GPS bracelet on one of its legs. He tilted the bird so it was looking down at Shudo instead of him. Feeling out of his depth talking to an actual child that wasn't traumatized, secretly an immortal that had lived longer than Shoyuta ever would or see. Both, he tried for something simple. It's really cool. Shudo nodded frantically. Very cool, he said seriously. Fukukado-san got him for me. His name is Dango 'cause he's the same color as the Sakura Dango I got from the shrine once. It was tasty. Shoyuta nodded along as he handed Dango back to his rightful owner and pulled out a chair for Shudo to sit on. A folding chair had appeared. At some point, and Shoyuta unfolded it to sit at a corner of the table since there weren't enough chairs for everyone. He ended up seated between Shudo and Emi. Shudo had sat Dango in his lap to free both hands for the important task of loading his plate with the Chinese takeout Shoyuta had brought them all for lunch. It was the last day of Endeavor's trial. It had been a huge public affair, constantly being reported in the news over the past few weeks. Today was the day the jury would be sent to deliberate over the verdict. Shoyuta hoped, and even though he wasn't a religious man, he prayed that Todoroki Enji would be found guilty of all charges. They had plenty of proof, testimonies of current and former employees, character witnesses, and incriminating documents. They'd also had to remove 3 people from the jury due to tampering, adding jury tampering to his list of crimes. No matter what, Shoyuta was going to be here for the family when they heard the verdict, no matter if he needed to help crack open a bottle of celebratory champagne or simply be a shoulder to cry on. Fukukado-san told me I'm just like a flamingo because they can survive freezing and boiling just like me. Shudo went on, even as he tried to scoop some combination beef onto his plate, only to spill a chunk of broccoli on the plastic table cover. Shoyuta quickly grabbed the serving spoon from Shudo to scoop the things he wanted onto his plate for him. Shudo's quiet thanks were drowned out by Natsuo loudly saying, "You're also like a flamingo because you have pink hair." "Do not." Shudo immediately protested. "White and red makes pink, so you have pink hair," Natsuo argued. From the looks around the table, this was a common argument. Natsuo had a sheet-eating grin on his face. "No," Shudo said again louder, "I have red and white hair. I wish I had pink hair." Shoyuta raised his eyebrows before sending a look at Rei. She was biting her lip in thought. "Box dye wouldn't cut it, I'd probably have to take you to a salon." She looked consideringly at his hair. "I'll have to see what I can do, baby." Shudo looked excited. "Really, Mum? Can I have pink hair too, Mum?" Fuyumi asked, perking up with excitement. "Then I can really be a flamingo," Shudo whispered. He looked like he'd just been told that Christmas was coming early. Tuya leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "You guys only want to dye your hair because of how cool my hair turned out." As the kids continued to bicker, Emi whispered to Shoyuta, "His hair may have turned out all right, but the bathroom looked like there'd been a squid orgy in it by the time he was done." Shoyuta coughed to stifle the unexpected laugh that bubbled up in the back of his throat at the image. Shoyuta took a sip of water right as Fuyumi tilted her head to the side and asked, "Fukukado-san, what's an orgy?" Shoyuta choked on his water as Rei turned a glare on a stuttering and backtracking Emi. Shoyuta was not so preoccupied with choking to death on his drink to miss the way Tuya flushed and refused to meet anyone's gaze. How they grow up so fast. Emi finally composed herself, managing to squeak out, "I'll tell you when you're older," before throwing her cup of lemonade back like a shot.